is the process of drinking your own urine and washing it as well. He's trying to get rid of because it's waste, but that's not true. Okay, just opened your mind a little bit and actually studied it.
I can't believe I'm actually going to have to do this, but I guess now's the best time to start a new series on my channel. This is going to be my first of a series of videos I'll call The Dangers of Woo. So that means we've now got video responses, let's have a conversation, or LHAC, interviews, live streams, then the loose grouping of responses to other things like comments, cracked codes, and papers. In this particular series, I want to tackle and focus on false medicine and other dangerous practices like essential oils, crystals, faith healing, and I guess today, urine therapy. So a little backstory, I wasn't even aware of this practice until I watched the Non Sequitur show's conversation on the subject between Godless Engineer and allegedly Dave. If you haven't seen the episode yet, I'll have it linked in the description below, as well as have some articles on the subject linked below as well. So first off, what is urine therapy? Well, basically it's the process of either drinking or bathing in one's own urine, or doing both, honestly. The practice has been around for thousands of years, and it stems from the idea that your body filters out toxins from the liquids you drink, leaving only the sterile liquids to pass through the digestive system once it's done its work. The liquid that you pass naturally, obviously, would be your urine, and this liquid is thought by urine therapy advocates to be incredibly sterile and thus useful for medicinal purposes. Drinking the urine is used as a treatment for things like cancer, diseases, or just general health purposes like a supplement. It's thought by advocates to act no differently than, say, milk, in that it contains very important antibodies and healing agents for the body. There are also advocates who claim that any minerals that our body doesn't presently need, but are still helpful, are disposed by the body during urination, and, as such, the urine contains these incredibly healthy and useful minerals after being disposed of. Like with most pseudoscience, this sounds like there's a lot of truth there, but I'll tackle that in a bit, so hold on to that for later. Another use for urine therapy that advocates will attest to is that the healing properties and minerals that can be found in your urine are a wonderful beautification product for the skin. There are advocates who believe that it helps remove wrinkles, soften skin, and even can help prevent common signs of aging, and just generally keep the skin healthy, not unlike a pharmaceutical cream. Again, as with before, if you take the claim that the body flushes essential minerals and healing agents it isn't actively using down the drain, the idea of it having medicinal and beautification properties seems to hold some water. But, as with all things, there comes a time when that water has to be flushed, lest this particularly bad idea start to turn the water to a brown-fetid sludge. Firstly, is urine sterile? In a word, no. Urine contains hundreds upon thousands of bacteria that the body has flushed out because it either doesn't need them or deems them harmful. This isn't counting the leftover matter from whatever you've been drinking. For instance, have you ever seen the difference in your pee after drinking only water for a day and then drinking only soda for a day? This is because of a pigment called urochrome or urobilin. The amount of yellow pigment in your urine is determined by everything you ingest, from food, drink, dyes and pastries, and even your medication. All of this will affect the amount of pigment your body injects into your urine. This can function as some sort of a warning sign, but it also means that your urine contains some particulates from digested sources. If you have clear or light yellow coming out in the stream, you're probably fine, but if you've got brown, it could signal that you have some severe muscle damage and potassium is leaking into the urine. Dark pink could mean that you have old clotted blood, orange could mean that you have gallstones or are severely dehydrated, or you could even have blue or green urine if the medications you're on cause that. Based on that alone, it seems that urine is definitely not always sterile, but it gets worse. Even the most clean urine contains at least 33 different types of bacteria in the most pure samples. That means if you have clear pee and perfect health and everything's great in your digestive tract, you still have more than 30 different types of bacteria being flushed out, and that is hardly what any doctor or anyone would call sterile. And again, that's for the cleanest and most pure urine, the stuff these advocates are saying to drink. Urine has also been touted as a catch-all sterilizer and painkiller for things like jellyfish stings and cuts, and for advocates of urine therapy, obviously, since we're on that topic. But with these claims, again, as I said, even the clearest urine contains enough bacteria to trigger an infection which would lead to a slew of other complications, especially when you're using it in lieu of other, less wooey medical treatments. For an example, what can bacteria do if it enters, say, the bloodstream when you're trying to use urine to sterilize something instead of, say, peroxide? If it enters the bloodstream, it can cause a condition known as septicemia, or more commonly known as blood poisoning. This can cause a wound or the surrounding tissue and veins to go septic, and essentially it means that the wound and everything around it begins the rotting process and starts to destroy itself. This is an incredibly destructive and painful process for the individual, and it's caused mostly by bacteria entering the bloodstream. Based on that one example alone, are you starting to see why urine might not be a sterile liquid yet? Again, this is just coming from the bacteria. I'm not even counting the other possible toxins that can be found in urine. And compared to your saliva, for instance, your urine contains 5 to 10 times more chemical compounds inside. There are obviously some chemicals that are incredibly useful and beneficial. For instance, we can actually get things like taurine that are used for energy drinks from urine. But in its basic, unfiltered state, you're getting all of the harmful chemicals as well. And while some chemicals are beneficial, like I mentioned, most aren't. So given all of this information, why do urine therapy advocates believe in this stuff? Well, in short, most don't know any better. Like I mentioned before, where things can actually sound like they're true even when they're not, especially when you compare something like urine to milk. Both are liquids that come out of the body, both contain chemicals that are passed on whenever they're excreted. One of them is a healthy drink, and the other is, well, piss. To someone just hearing these base facts, though, they sound very similar, with the only thing that would change your mind about it being the fact that society deems piss to be, disgusting. On top of this, there are actually societies that have been partaking in urine therapy for thousands of years. Much like with something like religion, which you all know I tackle on my channel all the time, there are cultures that practice and pass it down as fact. But why do people even think it works? Well, the fact of the matter is, much like something like prayer, which I may tackle in another video, the act itself makes one feel as if they're doing something, and if they've been told by other sources that it's beneficial, the likelihood of a placebo effect occurring increases. Even if you take placebo out of the mix, though, you would still have to face the fact that our bodies are just natural healing powerhouses. They may not be incredibly efficient at certain healing tasks compared to what modern medical tools can help facilitate, but on their own, our bodies can fight infection, diseases, viruses, heal cuts and bruises, and other skin damage all on its own. Obviously, anything more than a minor issue may require professional medical help, but in general, our bodies will do the best to heal themselves. No need of urine. When somebody drinks urine and then immediately feels like they're getting better because of placebo, and then the body's natural healing processes kick in, it can seem as if the urine was the culprit. But unfortunately, correlation does not always equal causation. Just because you drank urine and then felt better a day later doesn't mean that the urine was the cause. So how can this practice be harmful? Aside from the stated issues of bacterial infection, the real dangers of woo and other alternative medicine simply stem from the fact that people will use these alternative options instead of tried and tested professional medical help. There are some issues that modern medicine simply has not been able to tackle effectively yet, cancer being one of the main ones. But if you're suffering from an illness that modern medicine can at least treat, it would be better to rely on that medicine than it will be to rely on woo. Let's stick to the cancer issue. Let's say you have a 50-50 shot at survival if you undergo chemotherapy, but instead choose to take your chances drinking your own piss. I think it's pretty obvious what the outcome of that might be, but let's just go ahead and go along this tangent. There's a chance that the cancer will go into remission on its own, but that can happen regardless of whether or not you drink your own urine. Fact of the matter is, cancer goes into remission all the time. Where the nitty-gritty lies, though, is the fact that your chances of survival will inevitably increase with proper medical treatment, as opposed to hoping the issue will go away on its own. And drinking your own urine is very much hoping the issue will go away on its own. You're not treating the problem. Alternative medicine, woo, things like this can likely be incredibly comforting, but that's all it is. It's just comfort. And if you're in a life or death situation, complacency and comfort may not help and may actually kill you. But with that said, everyone, I actually have an announcement to make. So before we get into the Patreon slides, I've set up a Discord where you can all chat with each other and ask me questions, suggest videos, and, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. You know, the last time I made a Dangers of Woo episode, we covered a bit of a piss-poor topic. Okay, fine. The bad jokes aren't my thing. I'll just get somebody who's better at that whole shtick. But who would I open this video up to? Who could possibly help?
Did someone say bad jokes? Aha! A cry for help. Bionic Dance to the rescue.
Oh, I normally use portals and hop on other people's channels. Did you use a spaceship to get here, or...?
Almost. When I detected a friend in need, I leapt from my orbital station and made planetfall using my jetpack. So you might say that I... went down.
I think I'll let the audience decide what the implications of what you just said are. They can hash that out in the comment section. With that said, I was right about to tackle faith healing and intercessory prayer. Do you think you can help?
Why, yes. Yes, I can.
So, what is faith healing? Well, basically it's the idea that, given that a god is all-powerful, the god can logically cure anything. It can take many different forms, but today we'll be focusing on the Christian flavor of faith healing in its most common forms. So let's break down how prayer works first, since that is usually the first avenue of asking for help in order to receive the needed healing abilities of this deity. God's answers to prayer are usually yes, no, or yes but later. So let me posit a few examples. For prayer, we'll say the subject is Susie. Susie has cancer. A prayer for her cure is uttered. We expect one of three scenarios. God says yes, and the cancer goes away. God says no, and the cancer stays. God says later, and the cancer will remain until it leaves. Now, each of these is up to interpretation. Susie could suffer on Earth and then feel better in heaven, so an answer of no or later would be deemed as the exact same answer in this situation. However, the difference between standard faith healing and, say, prayer is a little bit more insidious. You see, with prayer, you usually have the three answers, but with faith healing, you're given two scenarios. You're either cured or you're not, and unlike with prayer, these scenarios do not hinge on the will of a god. They instead hinge on the human beings involved. If the healer and person needing to be healed do not have enough faith that the healing will work, it is claimed that it will not work. So if the healer has enough faith, and trust me, they will claim they do, if Susie isn't cured, it will definitely mean that she didn't have enough faith. It's Susie's fault that she wasn't cured. Obviously, there's a psychological component to this problem, and I find that pretty aberrant in itself, since with Susie, she would essentially be blamed for not getting better, which can actually make the problem much worse, since there is reason to believe that ability to heal is linked to stress levels. Now, there is something to say for the placebo effect, and while it's not entirely understood, it is no less an extremely powerful component to consider when treating any illness or testing any medication, and there can be a small benefit to having somebody think they're healed, or will be healed, in order to trigger a possible placebo effect. But I think Bionic Dance might be able to explain why that component doesn't necessarily have more pros than cons when it comes to intercessory prayer, and then we'll move on to faith healing after that.
Rather than make assumptions or rely on faith, studies have been conducted to see whether faith healing has shown any benefits, no difference, or worse outcomes when compared to modern medicine. Cardiologist Herbert Benson conducted a study in 2006 of the effects of intercessory prayer for cardiac patients. 1,800 of them, poor bastards. There were three groups. 605 received prayer for 14 days after being told they might or might not get prayer. 597 did not receive prayer after being told they might or might not get any. And 601 received prayer after being told that, yes, they'd be getting some of that spiritual mojo. The results? In the two groups who didn't know for certain whether or not they'd be getting prayer, complications set in between 51 and 52% of the patients. Awfully darn close, that. However, in the group that knew for certain they'd be getting prayer, complications set in for 59% of the patients. While that may not seem like a huge difference, it is, according to those conducting and reviewing the study, medically significant. Other studies which produce results of negative patient outcome were statistically similar. There are very few cases where prayer has been found to have any medically measurable benefit, and most of those either included a very small sample size or were conducted in ways that make the placebo effect a very likely possibility, as admitted by those doing and reviewing the studies. Successful in vitro pregnancy, for example, was one of the studies conducted which found a positive result. Not exactly a bad bad heart or a brain tumor. And one of the positive results studies, one of the in vitro experiments, created a scandal that led Columbia University to have its name removed from the study when it was discovered that one of its authors had only learned of the study 6 months to a year after it had been completed, and after a professor at another university found that the experimental procedures were flawed. There are, however, many other studies which have found no significant change in results whether prayer was applied or not. Bottom line, if you want to get better, prayer isn't exactly your best bet.
I believe the Templeton Foundation actually ran a lot of those studies, which is hilarious since they were desperately trying to prove that intercessory prayer works, and as you pointed out, it works roughly at the rate of chance. So we've got intercessory prayer out of the way. Well, what about faith healing? Well, that nonsense has its own issues. If somebody tries faith healing instead of actual medicine, the rate of recovery will be roughly equal to that of somebody who did, well, absolutely nothing. So this would be the same scenario if the person couldn't afford medical help, right? Well, no, not really. See, here's the thing. When you seek out faith healing instead of some actual kind of medical help, you're not doing nothing. You're actively walking away from real help. Even people who can afford treatment for their children's illnesses can and will choose bogus faith healing methods instead of real medicine which garners real results. And this leads to unnecessary suffering and even death. But I'm sure there's some actual data on how many children are harmed as a result of this practice, and if so, Bionic Dance, what did you find?
What I found is a lot of unfortunately dead kids who could have been helped by actual doctors. You don't have to do a lot of Google foo to find story after story of people whose children died because their parents decided to trust magical healing powers instead of taking their little booger eater to the doc. In 1998, Rita Swan, founder of Child, teamed up with pediatrician Seth M. Asser. What an unfortunate last name. I bet prayer didn't make his childhood any better. To review the deaths of 172 children who'd had medical care withheld on religious grounds. The results? They found that 140 of those kids had a 90% chance of survival if they'd gotten some genuine medical care. 35 states in the US have some form or another of legal shield for parents who decide to withhold their child's care on religious grounds. 16 of those, thankfully, have an exemption that allows a court to order treatment, but that's still a lot of places where a kid can get killed if their parents are faith heads. Seems strange if you think about it, and remember that a lot of religious people consider themselves to be pro-life. But something to keep in mind, if you're thinking your kid doesn't need that penicillin or insulin shot, there's a good chance that could land you in the slammer. It's not difficult to find more than a few examples of so-called parents getting put in the pokey after letting their toddler die for their God. So if your kid's life isn't enough of a motivation already, remember that not taking them to the pediatrician might land you in double jeopardy. That kind of cudgel shouldn't be necessary. You'd think you'd love your kids enough to get them fixed properly. But, well, there it is. Bottom line, stop killing your kids. It's, you know, rude.
Thanks, Bionic Dance. And if you haven't subscribed to her channel, you definitely should. She's one of the content creators that's been in our space the longest. If you're watching this on her channel, then, hi. You know, thanks to vaccines, we really don't need these iron lungs anymore. So, the iron lung. It was a device manufactured to assist the breathing of patients afflicted with polio. And polio has a bit of a history in the United States, but I don't want to get into that right now. Maybe in a later video if you guys want, but suffice to say, it absolutely ruins your quality of life. Now, we don't see much of this crippling virus anymore, and that's because, well, in the United States at least, we eradicated it by utilizing vaccines. Somehow, though, even with instances like polio, smallpox, measles, and other diseases that have been eradicated through the use of this medical breakthrough, there are still people today that argue against vaccination. In many cases, they flat out refuse to vaccinate their children from a variety of diseases, and we call these people anti-vaxxers. Let's start out with what a vaccine is. Vaccines are a substance used to stimulate the production of antibodies and help provide immunity to several diseases. They're made by taking the agent that causes a given disease, or a synthetic substitute, and introducing it in either a dead or weakened state into the body. Our bodies have a primary and secondary response to any agent entering it. The primary response identifies the agent and determines if it is or is not a threat, and if it is, to create antibodies to the infectious agent and destroy it. Problem is, infectious agents are sometimes strong enough to work incredibly fast, so even once our body is done analyzing and categorizing the threat through the primary response, by the time it creates antibodies, it can't produce them fast enough to effectively fight off a given disease. Once the body successfully fights off an infection, however, it does keep a log of what caused the problem, and if it ever analyzes that again, instead of creating a new database about this agent, it already has that data, and it just creates the antibodies again in a much faster rate. Think of it like making a mold for Jell-O. It takes a long time to make the mold, but once you have it, you can make Jell-O in that exact shape instantly at a moment's notice. The primary response builds the mold, and the secondary response uses the mold to make Jell-O, and that Jell-O fights off disease. Hashtag medical Jell-O. Flavored by nuclear fruit. Just kidding. When we use vaccines, the situation is a little bit different. We introduce the infectious agent to the body in such an incredibly weak state that the body can take its time analyzing and categorizing the data and facilitate a proper defensive response. Without having to work against the clock like with a live virus, the body can smoothly enter the secondary response mode and use the mold it creates in the primary response to destroy the infective agent. When the body encounters the full-powered final form of the same infective agent, it uses the mold it already has built to build a defensive antibody and destroy it. In short, vaccines prevent our bodies from having to make the uphill battle of fighting diseases, but they aren't magic cures. They just make the body operate better at using the tools it already has. Anti-vaxxers either don't understand this or simply don't care. But why? Well, our education system is bunk, as evidenced by the growing flat earth movement, so that's one problem, but is it perhaps a little deeper than that? Let's take a look at polio. Polio actually only affected a small portion of the United States population, but it was treated as an epidemic. People bought into the hysteria, vaccinations were developed and utilized, and over a generation or two, the polio virus was all but eradicated. Thing is, people are prone to hysteria for both good and bad reasons. Take a spokesperson like Alex Jones, repeatedly telling his viewers about the supposed efficacy of not vaccinating your children, and you'll soon have enough gullible schmucks posting anti-vax rhetoric on social media, and it gets gobbled up by people who simply don't know any better. The hysteria works both ways. And here's the thing, it's not just a modern issue. During the spread of smallpox in the mid-1800s, anti-vaccination movements began to prop up due to an aversion to the nature of how vaccines were implemented at the time. Without the aid of modern medical equipment, limps from blisters of people who had been vaccinated were inserted into scored flesh of an individual's arm, and if that wasn't graphic enough, the original vaccine came from the same blister limps of cows infected with the similar cowpox disease. In some cases, the clergy even objected to this practice because inserting any parts that came from an animal into the body was considered unethical from the biblical viewpoint from the pulpit. The point is that this isn't something new, and it's been going on for a long while. The difference between movements of older generations and now, though, is that with the advent of the internet and social media, bad ideas can propagate just as fast as good ones on a global scale. For instance, when someone tells you that they'd like to inject mercury into your child, if you don't know the whole story of how that mercury is simply a marginal preservative and not actually the active ingredient, you would likely shriek out in protest about injecting a toxic chemical into your child's bloodstream and call the person who suggested it a moral monster. This is fundamentally no different than a person screaming about how they will never shove infected cow blisters into their child's arm due to it being gross and unethical. The concepts are the same, and in both, there's an omission of information that skews the point so far that it can go from misinformation to disinformation. There have almost always been anti-vax movements and controversy surrounding new and prominent vaccines, but why? There are a few arguments usually posited outside of the misinformation problem I gave before, and I'll try to present them in an argument and answer format for just a few minutes.
Big Pharma makes tons of money off mandatory vaccines. It's unethical.
Yes, there is money being made in the vaccination business, but the cost of a treatment doesn't change the necessity of that treatment. There is profit to be made in the food business, for instance, and you still need to buy food to survive. A company making profit is not in and of itself unethical. It's exploitative practices that are unethical.
Vaccines cause autism.
No, they don't. The 1998 study that concluded that has been flawed, and attempts to repeat the study were done in the early 2000s and found no evidence of a link between the two. Even if this were the case, if your argument is that you'd rather have a dead child than an autistic one, then there's an entirely different conversation that needs to be had.
If everyone else is vaccinated, herd immunity will protect my child.
This is only half true. If half the population carries this same mindset, then everyone else is no longer vaccinated, and herd immunity no longer applies, and there is nothing protecting your child.
The vaccines don't guarantee protection. Why take them?
You're right, they don't. But they are a bulwark. This argument is analogous to trying to make the case that a bulletproof vest won't guarantee protection in a firefight. You would still be an idiot to not bring the bulletproof vest.
Taking too many shots weakens the immune system.
As I've explained earlier, this is a myth when it comes to vaccines. Each shot actually increases the body's capacity to fend off attacks from various infective agents by essentially increasing the amount of data it has to work with.
Natural immunity is stronger. We do not need vaccines.
You're right, natural immunity is stronger, but not everybody has that. And you won't know you have that natural immunity until you're already affected anyways. And as someone who almost died to the flu virus, while other family members that contracted it at the same time did die, I can attest that finding out after the fact isn't exactly ideal. And honestly, there's so much more I could get into on this topic, but I really do think that Drew from Genetically Modified Skeptic does a much better job in this particular area, and he's released a few videos on the subject, and I'll link them below for your viewing pleasure. I would highly suggest watching them after this. So today, as I promised, we are going to be tackling another episode of Dangers of Woo, this one talking about healing crystals. Typically in the Dangers of Woo series, I don't provide a video that I'm responding to, but instead research that I've brought up on the topic. This time though, the woo is a little bit hard for me to explain, so I found a really popular video on the topic and we're going to be doing a response to that. Also guys, please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. It's the fastest way to let me know that my content's worth sticking around for and get notified that new stuff is coming out. With that said, into the woo!
Today's video will be about crystals, what they are, how they are formed, how they work on the energetic levels, and meanings of some well-known crystals. Let's start with how crystals actually work. First of all, it's important to realize that our entire body system is just energy that shows up in different densities and patterns.
A few seconds in and we've already got a bit of an issue. From what I can tell, we are not actually made up of energy. Energy is a property of matter and we are made up of matter. Energy is simply the potential for a physical system to change. It is not what the physical system is made up of.
Our thoughts and emotions are connected to our physical bodies and have a density of their own.
I can see I'm going to be doing a lot of interrupting in this video. Thoughts do not have density in any way, shape, or form. Thoughts are a non-physical emergent property of the brain, the same way that the software in a computer browser is a non-physical pattern on top of the physical process of a computer. The computer is real. It has physical properties, just like the brain, but the thoughts, just like the programs, do not have physical properties. What she's going to be doing, though, is she's going to be using these terms that she's so ill-defined to make it sound like her woo can actually function in the real world. Once we start giving the brain waves some type of property outside of the chemical processes that cause them to come about, you are then able to make false inferences as to what is able to actually interact with those brainwaves. As a side note, it seems to me like the thought process that leads to brainwaves having some type of density is the same type of thought process that leads flat earthers to ill-defined density in the same fashion.
When these patterns of energy work in a balanced way, then we experience our health. However, these energy patterns can be disrupted, which then results in poor health, from headaches to serious diseases. Crystals are thought to be the most stable form of matter in the universe.
So there's a few things that are being described here, and the way in which they're being described is the issue. For instance, we can take issue with her actual claim, which I will do here in just a second, but the first thing I'm going to take issue with is the delivery method. If you check in the original video, which will be linked in the description, you'll notice that there are no citation links, there's no source links, nothing. There's absolutely nothing for people who are watching her content to actually check out afterwards to verify her claims. The other half of the issue is that she's saying the words, "it is thought that." This causes us a few issues. First of all, it means that we are no longer taking her claims on her face value. We are now to assume that there is a source for these claims, which is not cited or linked, but it also verbally takes the onus off of her who's actually making the claim. When somebody uses verbiage that implies that it is their thinking that something is the way that it is, we can then ask them why. But when you use the words "it is thought that," you are then taking the onus completely off of yourself and throwing it onto a source that you do not cite in any way, shape, or form. I know this might seem like I'm being pedantic, but I'm really not. This is language that you'll find as incredibly common in all kinds of woo. They'll say things like "top scientists agree," or "all people this," or "4 out of 5 dentists agree." It sounds like a qualifying statement, but it's really not. As for the problems with the actual claim itself, diseases are not caused by energy waves. I'm sorry, that is complete New Age crap. The germ theory of disease has a very thorough explanation of what causes diseases. As for crystals being the most stable form of matter in the universe, that, like almost everything else that has been said so far, is an easy way to use bad verbiage to make it seem like something is what it's not. What crystals are not is the most stable form of matter in the universe. Solids are the most stable forms of matter, and crystals just happen to be solids. So by this definition, all solids are the most stable form of matter and therefore have medicinal properties. Again, this is an issue you find with almost all forms of woo. You'll actually see that the verbiage is used in such a way that what they say isn't an outright lie, but it most certainly is not a truth. And I'm not necessarily saying this person is trying to lie with intent. They might thoroughly believe this, but that in and of itself is its own issue.
Due to how they are formed within our planet, crystals grow in the Earth's crust over millions of years at high pressures and heat, making them objects with the most energy, as each step in the formation of a crystal contains energy.
That's certainly not how energy transfer works. Using more energy to make something does not mean that the thing that you make automatically has more energy inside it. If I expend a certain amount of energy to make a ball of glass, and then I expend more energy making a different ball of glass that's inherently the same, the second ball of glass does not automatically have more energy inside it.
The crystal's journey begins deep below the planet's surface, where lava and hot fluids circulate. Crystallization occurs when layers of the planet's mantle fracture, which allows heated gases and liquids forced by high pressure rise towards the surface. Elements such as water, oxygen, sodium, iron, potassium, and magnesium are also present, and in the process they merge and dissolve, with other elements being pushed to the surface. As this mixture rises and passes through cooler, less active layers of rock, crystals begin to grow in the rock's cavities and crevices.
Now, from what I can tell, none of these statements are entirely inaccurate. It's just describing how particular crystals form. Although, this is another one of those things that you happen to see with all kinds of woo. There's a little bit of science involved. This tiny bit of fact will be used as a grounding point for you to determine the veracity of the rest of the claim. How much this one statement conforms to facts does not automatically mean that the entire claim conforms to facts. If you go back to listen to other Dangers of Woo episodes I've already done, you'll notice that a similar thing is said in each. In urine therapy, it's the claim that urine is sterile. For anti-vaxxing, it's usually the claim about different chemicals that are used as preservatives, like mercury. And for faith healing, substitute real science for the belief that prayer has a power behind it to begin with. In each of them, and with crystals, you start with something that people already believe to be true, and then use it as a route to expound further. This is how pseudoscience and manipulation work.
Crystals are alive like everything else in the universe.
If we're going to do what we've done with the rest of the video and assume that she's using a very different definition of the word alive than any other normal living being would use, then the claim might actually have some factoid behind it.
They work with the human energy field and are able to diffuse, absorb, move, or shift energy within the body.
And now we're moving into the real woo. We've gone from the establishing groundwork to the actual claim itself, that crystals can affect the body. A magnet can harm your body if you have a pacemaker. A radioactive rock can harm your body as well. But remember that these instances are incredibly different than a rock having very particular vibrations that affect the human brain waves. The fact that there are rocks that can have effects on the human body does not mean that all rocks have differing effects on the body.
Crystals vibrate at different levels depending on their composition and color, as do the cells in the human body. They all vibrate on their own frequency.
Again, this is another issue with woo. We hear something that actually is somewhat true. Solids, liquids, and gases are made up of particles that are vibrating at very, very particular frequencies. For instance, quartz, which is used in modern clocks, vibrates at a frequency of 32,768 Hz. That's equal to 2 to the 15th power cycles per second. So what she's saying isn't wrong. It's the claim that she's making with that as a basis that's wrong.
As do the energy centers in our body, our chakras. A video about chakras will be linked in the description.
So this particular type of woo relies on a completely different type of woo in order to gauge its efficacy, and she's more than willing to link in her description a source to the other kind of woo, but not to any of the actual scientific claims. Needless to say, what I get from this particular statement is that this has a target audience, and that target audience already believes these things.
Crystals operate by naturally focusing and magnifying the body's innate energies, dissolving and equalizing emotional, mental, and physical stress. They can alleviate suppressed or unreleased pain and help to make desired shifts in every aspect of one's being.
Now here's another issue we have. Getting rid of stress is something that almost anything can do, and what relieves your stress will be subjective and entirely based on the individual who is being stressed at that moment. But because a claim like this is subjective to begin with, it automatically will increase the rate at which people will claim anecdotal evidence in support of the claim. This is typically where you'll hear things like, "I put crystals around my head and that solved my headache." Genetically Modified Skeptic actually did a wonderful video about the efficacy of personal experiences already. If you can utilize the placebo effect in order to de-stress yourself, then it's just as useful as anything else. The issue I hold is when you're trying to convince other people of that.
So when we come into contact with a crystal, its vibration interacts with the vibration of our cells in our human body. First of all, yeah, it's not a myth that crystals have energy. Crystals actually have a very high and precise rate of vibration and are utilized in modern technology. This includes liquid crystals in calculators and clocks. They're also used in credit cards, phone lines, and lasers for microscopic surgery. Working with crystal energy helps the body to find its natural rhythm and restore its energetical balance.
I don't know how many times I'm going to say this in this video, but I think you probably see the pattern here. The crystal claim can't stand on its own, so it has to latch on to other things. So you grab little nuggets of information that may or may not be true, and then combine them together in a blender to come out with your claim. This particular smoothie will involve quartz clocks, prior belief in chakra, subjectivism and the possible ignoring of the placebo effect, and the actual science behind how crystals are formed and what their composition is and how they vibrate. You could believe every one of these things to be true. It would not then follow that crystals have healing properties though. But that is something we see in all types of woo, new age or not. Multiple belief or fact claims that somehow when compiled all together make an actual claim. Unfortunately, it's a very easy trap to fall in, and that's where I start to hold issue. People who are incredibly gullible can fall for something like this very easily. Also, small nitpick, energetical isn't a word.
Crystal healing is basically laying of the stones of different vibrational frequencies on your body in order to effect healing or change. It may also involve laying out different energy grids or specific patterns of crystals around the body. That way, by using patterns, the combination of stones can enhance their individual properties and direct energy. Crystals are thought to be able to relieve and release stress, stimulate brain activity, amplify your healing power and potential, restore energy and stimulate energy flow through your meridians and energy centers, reconnect you to yourself, ground you, and connect you to our earth.
Truth be told, crystals can do some of those things. They can ground you better. Laying them around in patterns can relieve stress. The thing is though, when it comes to examples like that, crystals aren't doing that because they're crystals. Crystals are literally filling in a blank slate that can be filled in by anything. Video games can ground you and de-stress you. Reading a book can ground you and de-stress you. These healing crystals aren't doing anything special. And if somebody wants to use them as a method of de-stressing, then that's on them. Just like I would use video games to de-stress myself, I'm not going to say that what you're doing is better than mine, or the other way around. I am going to say, though, that the claim that crystals are somehow special in what they do is completely bogus. On top of that, any medicinal claims about them being able to affect headaches, cure diseases, or realign chakras, whatever you mean by that, these are where the efficacy of your crystals start to fall apart. In practice, they seem to do nothing more or less than any other hobby would for an individual. And when they're looked at as a hobby, then they're perfectly harmless. When we start accepting the baggage of what else they're claimed to do, that's when you start to come across issues.
For hundreds of thousands of years, crystals, gemstones, and minerals have been used to heal or enhance physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual balance. The ancients must have somehow known that when worn, the energies of the crystals would interact with the human body's electromagnetic field and bring about subtle energy changes.
Or, as is the case with a lot of ancient knowledge, they simply believed that that's what happened, and you believe it now too, and both of you are wrong. Not all ancient claims are false, but this one definitely is.
Royals have worn crystals throughout history in their crowns, jewelry, thrones, swords, as rings or as necklaces. Interestingly enough, having a specific crystal in your crown could activate your crown chakra, and having a necklace over your heart chakra could activate your heart chakra. Same goes for rings, which would stimulate energy flow through your meridians, or earrings to stimulate reflex points. So that kind of makes you wonder if all jewelry was created to connect different healing stones to different energetic points on human body.
There's actually nothing interesting about that. For eons, people have associated different jewels, different flowers, even different hand signals to mean certain things. This is just basic communication. Purple meaning royalty had nothing to do with the color purple. It had everything to do with the rarity of the snail that had to be ground up in order to create that color at the time. In that same way, particular crystals being worn on particular parts of royals' body have nothing to do with chakras. Instead, they have everything to do with the image they portray to the people and the value of the individual gemstones. This is the same type of logic that leads people to look at composite shots that are used by NASA and then assume that because composite shots are used to create the image we know of as the Earth is then somehow flat. If something doesn't follow, it just doesn't logically follow. Past this point, she just starts talking about what different other cultures have used for crystals and what other jewelry they have used throughout history. If that's something that you'd like to hear about, then the link to her video will be in the description below. With that said, I do still need to give my take because this isn't just a video response, this is also a Danger of Woo episode. And honestly, I think that collecting crystals as a hobby is perfectly harmless. It doesn't have the same baggage behind it as something like anti-vaxxing does. I don't think there's any danger behind this practice, or even really any woo behind it, until you start assigning medicinal or psychological claims to it. The crystals are just rocks, and as rocks are, they're harmless until you start utilizing them as a tool. Now, past the fact that somebody could believe in this and then use it as some sort of substitute for actual medical care, which we see a lot of the time, what with urine therapy and anti-vax. The other issue I see from this is that there are some businesses that are profiting from selling these crystals as healing crystals specifically. At that point, you're just preying on magical thinking, and I usually tend to avoid that term, but I do think that here it somewhat applies. The focus of this video is going to be, well, shit. I figure it's high time we handled this too, since the first Dangers of Woo episode was about drinking your own urine, so why not tackle the other form of waste as well? So on this episode of Dangers of Woo, we're tackling colonics. You thought you'd get me that time. Alright, as promised, this episode we're going to be dealing with a pretty shitty topic, and you know what? I get it, that joke's incredibly horrible. My humor is as well. Why do you think I have my intro kill me so many times? So for those who aren't aware, there's a new thing going around that's not really that new in the woo new age health industry, and it's called colonics. I say it's not new because the practice actually dates back several hundred years to ancient Egypt. It has, however, gained some new traction. In a nutshell, a colon hydrotherapist will take a tube, insert it into your rectum, and flush water through it to get rid of all of the old fecal matter and other toxins. Now, for anybody who's well versed in New Age woo, you definitely know that toxins is a bit of a red flag word. Toxins are a catch-all term used by New Age Woo practitioners to signify some type of poison in the body that's slowly killing you. These poisons can take the form of anything. Usually they're related to your diet. The general idea behind toxins is that the food that we eat nowadays is so processed and manufactured that toxins get left behind in our system because our system can't properly digest those foods. This is usually followed up by the saying that there's just certain things that we were never meant to eat. What people who go on about toxins fail to realize, though, or perhaps ignore, is that what your body does with things that it can't properly digest is it flushes them. For instance, your body can't properly digest fiber, so I guess that means that you were never meant to eat it. However, eating fibrous foods like celery generally helps in maintaining good health because it can clean out your system. The fact that your body can't digest these foods actually works in the body's favor because then it can retool these foods as physical entities instead of just absorbing their nutrients. What I'm basically saying, guys, is if you're thinking about getting some colon therapy, before going into the rest of the video, you might want to consider eating more celery first. Fiber does a wonderful job of cleaning out your system that a tube really doesn't need to do. Now, there is a bit of confusion with colonics about whether or not it's different than an enema. In short, an enema will clean your rectal area's immediate area, whereas colonics are meant to clean your entire colon and filter out your whole digestive tract. So, same method, just more water and more pressure in the latter. As I said before, as far as the history goes, colonics actually does date back to ancient Egyptians, where they would use things like coffee instead of just water to filter out their rectums. Considering that colonics are supposed to remove accumulated waste, help prevent constipation, and improve overall health, this could be seen as something that was definitely useful. However, let's not forget about another old age technique that people thought was incredibly useful: blowing smoke up someone's ass. So the idea of shoving things up somebody's butt to cure them isn't exactly new. As far as advocates for the practice, one such advocate was actually Harvey Kellogg. Yeah, the founder of the Kellogg cereal company. He lectured at length several times about colon therapy, and he recommended colonics for many conditions such as depression and arthritis, because shoving water up your butt is going to help you with your stiff fingers. It's also going to stop you from having a chemical imbalance in your brain that makes you feel a lot less happy. I'll be honest, there is at least something to the idea that shoving things up your butt can make you more happy, but you've got to be into that kind of stuff, and generally water isn't on the list. Usually something a little more solid, with a bit more friction. What I'm saying is, please don't use colonics to replace sex toys. Generally speaking, colonics fell out of favor when mainstream laxatives hit the market. Ultimately, if you're trying to just fix some constipation, laxatives will do the job a lot easier and for a lot less money. Also with a lot less risk, but we'll get into that later. Staying on the history for now, ancient Greeks also adopted and expanded the idea of colonics from its inception, applying it to the belief of the four humors. The four humors, in a nutshell, was an old technique for maintaining health where it was thought that maintaining 4 different types of liquid inside the human body would maintain general health. These liquids were blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, and if your body had too much of any one of them, flushing one of them out was needed to improve health. Now obviously the entire idea of the four humors is completely bunk with modern medical science throwing it out the window, but I will provide a link to the four humors in the description if you would like more information on them. Suffice to say, applying colon therapy with the four humors in mind, trying to flush out a particular type of liquid from the body in order to improve health, is just as bunk as the original humor therapy was to begin with. Also, one of the strongest supporters throughout history of colonics has been Ilya Mechnikov. He thought that toxins shortened the general lifespan when they were accumulated in the body, and that the colon was not efficient enough to remove said toxins. Remember, toxins is a catch-all term to mean anything and nothing at the same time. It can mean whatever the Woo practitioner of that age needs it to mean at that time, and that's what makes that term so dangerous and loaded. Not unlike how loaded your rectum will be if you decide to get into colonics. And speaking of things that come right out of the backside, what are the claims that colonics endorsers espouse? Well, for one, obviously it's said that it cleanses out old toxins that are left in the body. It's also supposedly able to get rid of old poop that your body wasn't otherwise going to be able to get rid of on its own. It is thought that this built up fecal matter can also lead to harmful bacteria and and yeast growing inside the colon. Also, as this feces coats the walls of your colon, it is also supposed to prevent water and nutrient absorption from the colon, causing more nutrients to pass through the body and into the fecal matter instead of actually being absorbed as they should. Now, there's a bit of a contradiction here that I hope you have all caught on to. If the fecal matter is supposed to prevent the absorption of nutrients in the body, it would then logically follow that it's just as difficult for the body to absorb these toxins that are supposed to be dicking around. But that's the thing with all New Age woo, if you actually think about it, it stops making sense. One of the stated benefits of colon therapy is also that it will help you be more regular, but as Stephen Barrett writes, the importance of regularity to overall health has been greatly overestimated for thousands of years. Some practitioners also advocate for using colonics because it will remove dangerous parasites inside the body. They also typically will diagnose their patients with these parasites and then recommend colonics as a procedure to remove them. The diagnosis is almost always bogus. All in all, it doesn't sound like this is anything horribly bad, but we'll get into the risks in just a second, as I said. Before that though, let's get into what colonics actually does. For one, it will get rid of any excess feces that your body has built up inside your colon. The thing is, though, is that the colon is actually an incredibly self-sufficient item, and it can do that on its own fairly well. Typically, going in for colon hydrotherapy can cost about $80 to $100, whereas picking up an over-the-counter laxative can cost a couple bucks. And effectively, it will do the exact same thing. If you're just wanting to have your area up there be cleaner, then I would highly recommend just going for an enema instead. They have their own risks, but that's a completely separate topic. Risk-wise, the California Department of Health Services actually recognizes that colonics have no real health benefits but do have a number of serious hazards. Like I said before, any perceived benefits that could be gotten from colonics can also be gotten from your everyday laxative. As for hazards, serious illness or death could be caused by contamination of the colonics equipment, death by electrolyte depletion, and there's also the risk of bowel perforation where, as the name implies, you'll actually have some holes punctured through you. There's also a risk of heart failure. Generally speaking, that one usually comes if you have a predisposed condition, though. Septicemia is also another health risk involved when participating in colonics. This is where bacteria gets into the blood and basically makes it go septic. I believe we covered that as a health risk on an earlier Dangers of Woo episode. William Tarvis, a PhD who wrote on colonics, considers them a health fetish and that the cleansing and detoxification ideas that have swept the nation have no actual physiological significance. They only have emotional meaning. So all in all, the real danger in this type of woo is that it claims to be something that it's not, and it has no actual health benefits and a myriad of risks instead. So like with the urine therapy that began this series, I think it's safe to say that this particular practice can be pretty succinctly flushed. And if you're not tired of hearing my terrible jokes and puns, why not hit the subscribe button in order to be notified whenever I have new content out? What time is it? Oh god, I completely missed my Friday upload. Sorry about that, guys. I guess I was in a turkey coma. Well then, what do we have on the agenda for today now that I'm a day late? Make a video about how your good buddy Cosmological is very cool. Oh, well, you asked for it. Allow me to make a video presentation on Wait a minute. Oh, he hasn't made a video in how long? Never mind, I'll have to get back to him on that. Maybe if we can convince Logic to give him a shout-out, he'll start uploading. Because I know for a fact that a shout-out from me won't convince him to do that. Anyways, on to the actual topic at hand. I have a special request from one of my patrons. They gave me a list of topics they would like to see handled on my channel, and I decided to go with Orgone energy. For those who don't understand what that is, well, let's go ahead and roll the intro a whole minute into this video, and let's get into that. Intro? Oh, of course it would follow. Once again, I'd like to thank Patreon donor Andrew for suggesting this video, among others that will probably be coming out in the future. So what is Orgone energy? Well, as it turns out, I've been meaning to tackle spirit science for a while, so this would be a wonderful first time to do so. Because as it turns out, they've produced a video on Orgone energy, so let's see what they have to say.
To discuss orgonite, first we must discuss the basics of orgone energy. Simply put, orgone is energy. In fact, it's another name for the multi-named etheric energy that is everywhere and embodies all things. Reiki energy, prana, biomagnetic energy, chi, soft electrons, and life force energy are all named for the same thing.
That's kind of true. The origin of orgone energy goes all the way back to Wilhelm Reich, who was a student under Freud. It was an extrapolation on the Freudian concept of the libido. From what I can gather, he basically thought that the libido essentially was a physical manifestation of energy that could be harnessed and measured. He viewed it as a life-affirming force, whereas when you look at Freud's research, he seems to have been a little more solipsistic in his approach. These ideas were only generally respected among scientists in the early 20th century because the idea of molecular biology was still in its infancy. Reich was also a materialist, so he believed that life force such as orgone energy could be susceptible to physical experiment. As a result, he ended up developing technologies that he claimed would actually cure cancer utilizing this orgone energy. Truth be told, I could write an entire video out on Wilhelm Reich because there's a lot of history to cover there, and it falls directly in line with the general flow of my channel. Let me know in the comment section below if you guys would like me to do a video tackling the ideas of Wilhelm Reich. Until then, he'll just be a footnote in this video.
An orgone matrix, or orgonite crystal device, is a device that provides assistance with working with these etheric energies. Orgonite both releases orgone energy when stimulated by other forms of energy, and has the capacity to change orgone energy from one state to another. It is especially suited for dissolving negative energy in an area and converting it to balanced, healthy energy.
Alright, so this idea is right up there with feng shui and other types of crystals, in that proponents of these ideas believe that by arranging their rooms in particular patterns with particular objects, they will increase their luck or positive energy. There are actually some companies that will market articles of clothing and orgone pulsators said to keep the energy in a room at normal levels. So be sure, there is at least some money to be made in this realm of woo. The problem is that there's only a scant few papers on orgone energy, possibly 4 or 5 at best, and none of it led to anything truly conclusive on the subject. Basically what this means is people who are claiming that they can create devices utilizing this energy to do just about anything from increasing the positive energy flow in a room to curing cancer are basically bullshitting you.
This makes it especially useful in a wide range of applications, from alternative health, radionics, and other traditional metaphysics.
I find it strange that he says that orgone energy can be used in traditional metaphysics when traditional metaphysics typically doesn't assume materialism. In fact, in most philosophical debates, I generally find the idea of metaphysics directly juxtaposed to the idea of materialism, with few exceptions. The reason this is relevant is because Wilhelm Reich, the originator of this energy idea, was philosophically a stark materialist. But this seems to be rhetoric to just say that orgone energy has lots of applications, like practically every other type of woo that is said to have lots of applications.
Where did orgonite come from? Well, in the 1930s and 40s, Dr. Wilhelm Reich was able to detect and measure the existence of etheric energy, which he called orgone, using a modified Geiger counter. He determined that by stacking alternating layers of fiberglass, which is an organic substance, and steel wool, an inorganic substance, you could attract and collect orgone energy of both positive and negative polarities. He called the positive energy POR and the negative energy DOR, which stands for positive orgone and deadly orgone. He began constructing a device that was able to successfully heal his patients of various ailments, including various forms of cancer, by having them sit inside the box for periods of time.
Yes, as I stated earlier, this is one of the claims that he made about his discoveries with orgone energy. It seems, though, that thanks to his studies and declarations, he was landed in the US penitentiary in Pennsylvania and died of congestive heart failure there, effectively making him a martyr in the eyes of orgone energy proponents. This is unfortunate because even though it's almost inarguable that anybody claiming that they have a cancer cure that convinces people not to trust traditional medicine should be punished accordingly for being death peddlers, it will invariably have the converse effect of causing these people to be elevated once history gets a hold of them. Everybody loves an underdog story, and an underdog story where your martyr dies is certainly one that can ring the bell true for the cause.
In 1986, scientists at the University of Marburg in Germany published the results of a blind study, which showed that 30-minute orgone accumulator treatments caused a consistent psychological effect. They published that their investigations displayed evidence for the assumption that the properties of orgone accumulators and its effect on humans factually exists. Reich's work continued into the 60s by a really open-minded Russian scientist named Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev, among others, who also scientifically proved that such unseen energies do exist all around us. This work led to the Soviet military using torsion field sciences in their military defense applications, which shows that amazing discoveries that can change the world can both be used for the light as well as the dark.
Alright, this has got to be one of those things that needs to be addressed anytime it comes up. You don't prove anything in science. That's a category error. Math is where proofs belong. Science has no use for proofs. At best, in science, you would articulate that something appears to be the case, but you do not prove something one way or another. Also, a note on torsion fields. The mere fact that a country decided to try to apply something into its military sciences doesn't necessarily mean that it was true. For instance, you can actually go to the CIA's website and find several articles they've written on astral projection. Does this suddenly mean that astral projection is real and it has good military applications? No, it just means that it's been researched. Just because prominent scientists have looked into something does not automatically verify that something is in fact the case.
In continuing this work, modern science has taken it to whole new levels in trying to figure out the nature of dark matter, zero-point energy, and the vacuum flux, and these are all discussions for another time.
And none of those things have anything to do with orgone energy.
In 2000, orgone accumulators came into being when Don and Carol Croft discovered through much research that mixing organic fiberglass resin and metal chips poured into small molds like paper cups and muffin pans would produce a substance which would attract etheric energy.
But wait, earlier in the video you said that Wilhelm Reich had already done that. So at best, these new orgone accumulators only came into being because people decided to take his ideas, which were bunk, and make their own thing that is also bunk. Applying the same flawed methods to create a smaller version of the thing that Wilhelm Reich tried to make doesn't make the thing better. You simply created smaller woo, but strangely enough, it doesn't make it any less woo.
Then, by putting crystals into the mix, you get something even more amazing.
Why yes, if you take this one type of bunk woo and mix it with another type of bunk woo, you get a lot of bunk woo. Conversely, this doesn't make things any more or less woo. You just get more of the woo. Is it confusing? No, it's just stupid.
Carol Croft, who was incredibly gifted in sensing etheric energies, found that adding a quartz crystal to the orgonite would cause the orgonite to not just attract all kinds of energy, but rebalance and transmute all of the negative energy into positive. As we learned in Crystals 1, this is because the molecular structure of quartz is incredibly stable and harmonically aligned with the geometry of the universe.
I briefly covered quartz when I did my video on crystals, and quartz does have some interesting properties that are worth noting, but none of them repurpose energy and transmute it. Also, on bringing up Carol Croft, her website actually has orgonite products listed for the low price of $80. Because I too would like to buy something that I could make for about $3 or $4 by shoving some fiberglass and metal shavings into a muffin tin for a whopping $80. Remember, not all woo is a scam, but it certainly can all be made into one. Believing in ghosts is woo, but it is not a scam, but selling somebody a ghost detector is.
Organic substances attract and hold a scalar charge, while metallic substances tend to repel it. Basically, orgonite pulls in bioenergy, and while energy is inside the device, metal particles and organic resin both push and pull on it in all directions at the same time. This puts friction on the energy, where the crystal will begin to create order from chaos by aligning the structure of the energy into a more positively aligned pattern. Crystals and gems all have their uses that we've looked at, and orgonite does too. Orgonite is good for putting in an area that is needing a transmutation of a lot of negative energy into positive energy.
Okay, I'll remember that. The next time that I'm in the middle of a riot, I'll just go ahead and toss some of your $80 orgonite transmuters, and everything will just sort itself out, I'm sure.
And depending on what that situation is, you may need lots or very little.
Sorry, let me rephrase that. I'll throw a lot of your $80 orgonite bombs in there, and that will fix everything. Wow, believing rocks can do things that they can't is really expensive.
There's actually one final thing I'd like to bring up about orgonite, which is actually called tower busting. It has been widely experienced that the widespread use of cell phone towers create a thick blanket of DOR, or negative orgone energy, around the areas between them.
Ah yes, that verbiage. Widely experienced, but never widely verified.
This saturates our homes and communities with negative energies that promote drought, negativity, fear, and so on.
So let me get this straight. Cell phone tower exists, therefore drought happens. Cell phone tower exists, therefore people get more fear, something we can't accurately measure. Cell phone tower exists, therefore negativity. Allow me to unpause your video from my cell phone for the irony.
I'm not saying that the towers are causing the negativity of the world.
No, but you inferred it.
but perhaps just stimulating or intensifying it.
Well, as a pragmatist, I'd argue that those are the same thing. If positive and negative energy both exist and there's no way around that, there's absolutely no functional difference between creating negative energy and simply multiplying currently existing negative energy. If I were to buy into your woo for just a second, I would argue that it's inconsistent even if I bought into it.
However, it has been experienced that this can be remedied by placing or burying orgonite at the base of a cell phone tower. Thousands of aware and selfless, beautiful people in the world have begun doing this and slowly helping out in what is being called the orgonite gifting movement.
So let me get this straight. The gist of this is, cell phone towers create all this negativity, so we need to buy more of these orgonite structures in order to bury them and gift them to the cell phone towers to fix all the negative energy. I told you, thinking that rocks can do things that they can't can get really expensive. I feel like we're getting to the point where the only solution to this entire problem is just to bomb the entire world with nuclear fruit. The Muslims tell me they've got lots of it in hell.
And this is happening all over the world. And we need your help as well.
Of course you do. But the most help you'll get from me is the little bit of exposure that my tiny channel might get yours. But in all honesty, I'm okay with the little bit of exposure that you'll get out of this because it's at least negative exposure. So I'm hoping this has a net positive effect on the world, because at least I can measure that type of effect better than an Orgon accumulator can. So this is usually where we get to the part of the video where I tell what the actual dangers of this are, but I think it's pretty obvious that the only real danger this woo presents is one to your wallet. The biggest exception being when you start using orgon therapy to fix a medical illness that can be fixed by actual real medical science. If you're projected to die of cancer in a year, but with chemotherapy you might have 5, with orgon therapy you'll still have that 1 year. It's not that it didn't do anything and therefore it wasn't harmful, it's that it will actively keep some people from seeking real help and therefore cause real harm. That, and obviously when people are losing their money to this type of easily debunkable bullshit, it's not exactly fair to the people who are gullible enough to lose their money, but it has this terribly circular effect where the more money gullible people feed into organizations that sell crap like this, the more money they make, and therefore they realize this stuff is profitable and propagate it more. Once propagated, the ideas reach more gullible people, they buy into those ideas, and give more money over. It's a horribly vicious cycle, and I truly wish that people were less gullible so they wouldn't buy into it. But speaking of guys, Suris here. Today I've got a video suggestion by Twitter user Mike. He requested a Dangers of Woo episode on a company named Lavelle that are distributing a product named Thrive. With that said, thank you for the suggestion, Mike, and we're going to go ahead and start this Dangers of Woo episode. So, the video that I'm going to be showing you guys is one of their advertisements on their YouTube channel. Before we get into that though, I'd like to talk a little bit about their company. The company's name, as I said before, is Lavelle, and their actual product is called Thrive. Thrive is a vitamin supplement / life-changing experience product that is supposed to change everything about your life for the better once you get it. That should already raise some red flags. Their marketing is incredibly pleasing to the eye, and it boasts that they have a very simple procedure. You simply take 2 pills, and then you take a shake, and then you apply a patch. All of these together are supposed to provide you with all the nutrients your body needs that for some reason can't give it with a healthy diet. It also purports to make sure that your energy levels throughout the day will go up. Their YouTube channel is almost nothing but either advertisements or testimonials saying that their advertisements are right and that their product is good. As with any kind of woo, we should probably go ahead and look at this with a grain of salt and understand that multiple anecdotes do not equal data.
Heard about Thrive? It's a question asked 1,000 times a day.
Only because your advertising makes that the case. The fact that people are advertising your product by word of mouth shouldn't really mean anything.
The Thrive 8-week experience has become the fastest growing health and wellness movement in North America. Over 3 million people have started the experience, and anywhere from 10 to 50,000 experience orders ship out every day. Why is this 6-letter word, THRIVE, turned into a phenomenon? Because it's simple.
And there's our red flag number 2. Something being simple does not mean that it has any efficacy. I think I've said it once or twice in the Discount Hofen series. Often simple lies are a whole lot easier to digest than complicated truths. But let's continue. They might have some merit to their claims.
1. Take 2 Thrive Premium Lifestyle Capsules on an empty stomach as soon as your feet hit the floor in the morning. 2. 20 minutes later, drink the Thrive Ultra Micronized Lifestyle Mix. 3. Apply patent-pending DFT dermafusion technology to clean, dry skin. That's it. You're all done. And now you're set to thrive for the day.
Alright, so what we have here is essentially a multivitamin tablet, followed by caffeine, followed by a patch. Their product, Thrive M, is basically a multivitamin with a proprietary blend of ingredients that has 11 vitamins and minerals with any RDA daily value. They don't put vitamin C or E in it, so if you went with a different type of supplement, then you would probably end up having better results, seeing as most multivitamins contain the same ingredients that their tablets do, but also contain vitamin C, which is incredibly useful for your immune system. The reason this distinction matters, though, is not because I think that people should buy other products besides theirs specifically. It's because a bottle of multivitamins can cost about $10, and it will keep you in vitamins for about a month to 3 months, depending on which ones you're picking up. If you went with Thrive, though, these supplements would end up costing you between $60 and $100 per month. So you're paying multiple times more for less. But so what if it's just expensive? It's supplements, right? I mean, if it helps your body, then if people are paying for it, what's the problem? The problem lies with the fact that these are, by their very nature, supplements, and supplements aren't really that well regulated in the United States because, well, they don't have to be. This is generally due to the fact that supplements don't do a whole lot for your body that a healthy diet wouldn't already do. Unless you are specifically lacking in a specific type of vitamin, then you probably don't need supplements for general health and wellness. For a while, I had to take vitamin D supplements because my body wasn't producing it very well, but these supplements were suggested to me by a doctor. Generally speaking, unless your body is lacking in a particular vitamin, then you don't need supplements for it to create that vitamin. It's already going to grab it and extract it from the foods that you eat. But let's continue their video.
Because it's innovative. We all have nutritional gaps. No matter how well we eat or live, we simply can't get the body everything it needs from a nutritional standpoint.
But you can, like I said earlier. And again, no, a multivitamin pill is not innovative. It's a thing that's been on the market for decades. Pairing it with a shake and a patch doesn't automatically make it innovative. Weight loss fads have done things like these throughout the ages, and it almost always ends up being just a fad diet that doesn't do anything that better eating and exercise wouldn't automatically do for you anyway.
That's why Thrive was formulated, to supplement your diet and lifestyle. Once you complete your simple Thrive 3 steps in the morning, you've now introduced 3 different Thrive formulas that synergistically work as one, feeding your body over 100 premium-grade vitamins, minerals, plant extracts, digestive enzymes, probiotics, antioxidants, protein, fiber, and more.
Again, not things you couldn't get from literally any other supplement on the market. Take a couple vitamin gummies, drink a weight loss shake, and then have some herbal tea, and you'll have generally the same effect. Except that this actually has a lot more caffeine in it than a standard cup of tea does. Caffeine is also one of the things that we know for a fact helps people feel awake and helps them feel like they have more energy. So if you have people feeling like they have more energy when they're taking a patch instead of pills that have a ton of caffeine in it, then there really isn't any question as to why.
The premium-grade nutrition helps fill in your body's nutritional gaps. The result is mental clarity, more energy, calms general discomforts, supports healthy joint function, immune support, better weight management, and more, because it flat out works. Check out what just a few Thrivers are saying about their Thrive experience.
I noticed that increase in energy right away. My skin, my hair, I look different, I feel different.
And the placebo effect is a wonderful thing.
Really very patient and happy. My husband was noticing a difference. My kids were like, who's this woman?
The product was unbelievable. 3 days into the experience, I was feeling like 25 years younger. There's something really different here.
And this isn't unlike something that we've seen in almost every other testimonial for every other type of woo there is out there. There's people who swear by drinking their own urine because it helps them feel better. There's people who swear by colonics because it helps them feel better. There's people who swear by the power of prayer because it helps them feel better. All that really matters here is whether or not it's actually been tested, peer-reviewed, and if the results have been consistent. Spoiler alert, they haven't.
Absolutely been loving it, feeling better and sleeping better, to living better and enjoying a new life.
Within 2 to 3 hours, it completely changed my life. All I know is that it works, and you have to be on it because it's changing lives.
Don't you love the language here? Not just it's been working for me, but you need to be on it as well, which, given that this is a for-profit company, means you need to be giving them money like I'm giving them money. This is probably the point where I should emphasize the fact that the Lavelle company is primarily a direct sale company, which is not unlike a multi-level marketing company. In fact, the only difference between a multi-level marketing scheme and a direct sale scheme is that in multi-level marketing, you get money for recruiting people, and in direct sale, you don't. However, if you are a direct sale agent for Lavelle, they do have tons of incentives for you in order to get you to keep on selling, including discounting and or giving you your products for yourself for free. But here's where the actual sinister problem with direct sale companies and multi-level marketing comes in. Unlike a standard job where there are multiple people who work to get pay and then can live off of that pay, usually, sometimes. I don't know, I live in America, we've got a big problem with that actually. With multi-level marketing schemes, not only do you usually have to buy the products before you're able to sell them, but for every one really loud success story, there are usually 1,000, if not more, failures. If you'd like more information on that, Genetically Modified Skeptic actually did a video on multi-level marketing schemes and their cult-like actions.
Now I don't get tired at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I stay focused. I feel like I have a razor-sharp focus all day long, every day. It's changed my life.
I love skeptics because I was one of them. My daughter said, Mom, I don't know what you're doing, but I think this is the you that was way before me. I think you're getting you back, Mom. Not only do you get your health back, but your family gets you back.
Well, at least she likes skeptics, right? Generally speaking, when you're dealing with something like hard drugs, getting your family back involves not taking the drugs any longer. Although here, it seems that the testimonial would have you believe that everybody is suffering from this problem, and the way for your family to get you back is by purchasing their incredibly expensive products. That is incredibly manipulative language, and I'm really not a fan of it.
Like I'm the best version of me that's ever existed. You have nothing to lose but so much to gain. It will completely change your life.
So, now that you've heard about Thrive, the next question is, are you ready to start the experience?
No, I am definitely not ready to start Thrive, and there's a couple reasons for that, you know, over and above all the ones that I listed. If you look at the nutrients on the packaging of their products, not only do they have nutrients that, you know, are already found in other supplements and in more diverse varieties. But unlike your standard multivitamin, they actually have what's called the proprietary blend for their products. The dangers of anything with what's called a proprietary blend is that they don't have to tell you how much of anything is in their product. And it's not the same thing as having an FDA-approved product like, say, a Coca-Cola that has a proprietary blend for flavor. This is a supplement that is supposed to directly benefit your health. You really should know what you're paying for. The gold standard for whether something is healthy or not is not the FDA approval, but when something is not FDA approved, at least here in America, that's usually indicative of something to be somewhat skeptical about. Also, the claim that the 3 different Thrive products are supposed to work in tandem with one another is completely bogus. While the shake actually does contain some nutrients that the pills are missing, it still doesn't have vitamin E or C in it, and most importantly, you shouldn't have to buy these 3 different products in order to put them in tandem with one another and say they're working synergistically. If one pill contains a type of vitamin B and another pill contains the exact same type of vitamin B, you shouldn't have to use the 2 in tandem in order to get your correct results. You are able to condense these vitamins into one product, but as a company, it makes more sense to sell 3 products and let your consumers know that each product is inseparable from the others. There's a website named Truth in Advertising that also has this wonderful quote when talking about Thrive. The greatest branding can't hide a faulty product, even if you declare that the product is premium. One thing you should know is that there has never been any research done to verify that Thrive works. Wherever they came from, testimonials are really not worth the paper they're written on. What's really worth something is some good solid research on the product. Search high and low, but you won't find any on Thrive. They also go on in the same article to say that claiming that something is natural, clean, and healthy, weight management-wise, is wonderful, but they're completely meaningless buzzwords for nutrition. Oh, and I haven't talked about their patch yet. That's probably something I need to get into before we end the video. The patch contains an herb called Callias forscoli, and it is the premium ingredient in that patch. So has this herb been shown in any reputable studies to cause weight loss? Well, no. And what studies have been done on this herb have not been done with a delivery system to the body like the patch that Thrive is using. So even their method doesn't contain any sound research. The sad thing about this entire product is that it is a weight loss program, which are notorious for lying to their customers anyways, combined with a direct selling / multi-level marketing scheme. Way to have a 1-2 punch of dishonesty there. Anyways, that's all for this episode of Dangers of Woo. I hope I gave you guys enough information to make an informed decision on these guys yourself. I'll put a link. Suris here. Well, today we're going to be talking about vitamin B17, since that was Twist's requested video for when he became a $50 patron. I also may have accidentally called him Trick when I announced that he had become a $50 patron, so yeah, sorry about that. That's on me, and that was my mistake. Now that we know what we're going to be discussing, let's go ahead and hop right into the fan art. The first one we have is from Runefar, although this is not the first one that he's submitted. Next on the list is one from Sarah Lena, and I gotta say, I look really somber in this one. And finally, we have this piece from Flickerfay. And I've gotta be honest, in this one, my character looks like a dwarf right out of the forge. I'm also digging the cracks on the other side of the hammer there. I guess that's what happens whenever you keep hitting the ground in your intro. Speaking of which... Okay, so I rolled that intro a little early so I could get my bad joke out of the way, but thank you all for the fan art you've submitted. It's honestly one of the best things I can wake up to, is seeing that fan art section actually teeming with new things. I gotta say though, it's still very surreal for me to live in a world where fan art of me exists at all in any capacity. Alright, with that said, let's go ahead and get right into this. First things first, I'm gonna go ahead and apologize for the video that I'm going to present today, as it's one of those cringy text-to-speech ones. It does, however, have almost 1 million views, which to me says that it's reaching a lot of people, and that is kind of dangerous given the subject matter we're going to be talking about today.
Is vitamin B17 the greatest cover-up in the history of cancer?
Yeah, I'm going to go with short answer no.
It has been becoming increasingly apparent in recent years that there are a number of alternative cancer treatment methods which have proven to either eradicate cancer cells on their own, or even assist with the more traditional methods of chemotherapy and radiation.
Yes, there are a lot of factors that go into the treatment of cancer. Chemotherapy is one, having a healthy diet is another, but it should be noted that anytime a video starts out saying a cure for cancer and then says it holistically as if cancer's one thing, you can usually expect there to be some dishonesty following that, considering that cancer is many things. It can exist in many places in the body, and it takes so many different forms that methods of attack are not universal. Some skin cancers can be fought pretty easily, whereas something like lung cancer can be a bit harder. Same thing with liver cancer, but who am I to say anything about that? I only have a bunch of dead family members from both of those things. So I kinda have a horse in the race.
Many of these alternative treatments do not get the recognition that they deserve from either mainstream media or mainstream medicine. In fact, in many states alternative cancer treatments have been banned or made illegal and, according to the law, one can even be forced to undergo chemotherapy against one's will.
Yeah, I looked up this claim, and it turns out that it really only seems to apply to minors. You know, those people who already don't have the same rights as adults by the very nature of them being minors. Usually, something like this is held in place so that if they have a parent who's a quack and thinks that alternative medicine for cancer treatment's a good idea, they don't accidentally kill their kids. You know, the types of parents who might say, it's okay, you don't need any of that nasty toxic chemotherapy to get rid of your cancer, just eat this handful of apricot seeds. And that's not a joke. That's actually what we're going to be talking about. Watch.
It is important to note, however, that choosing one of these natural, alternative cancer treatments does require you to do a lot of research, because there is very little funding, or merit, allotted to their study. The cancer industry does not want to look at these alternative methods and spends very little of their funds informing people about preventative medicine.
Yeah, again, the problem here comes with the fact that cancer comes in many different sizes, varieties, and flavors. For instance, if we're talking about breast cancer, tamoxifen and raloxifene are the only approved drugs for that. For preventative medicine, mind you, not for treatment. When it comes to something like potential skin cancer from, say, UV radiation, there is sunscreen. And when we're talking about something like lung cancer, usually the risk factors have a lot to do with your environment. So eliminating risk factors in your environment is about the best you can do in most cases. I could go down the list for every single type of cancer, but I think you get the point. Each one of them comes in a different flavor, and preventative as well as post-diagnosis treatment will vary based on the cancer.
In fact, one particular vitamin that is believed to be extremely beneficial in fighting cancer cells has actually been banned by the FDA and is illegal for treatment in the United States, and that is Letrel.
Lettuce contains one of the greatest concentrations of vitamin B17 on the planet, and it can be found in the often overlooked seed of a popular fruit, the apricot. Apricot seeds can be found beneath the hard pit inside the apricot, and many people are unaware that they are both edible and delicious, and that they contain a cancer-fighting agent called amygdalin within.
Alright, now for the next bunk claim. Vitamin, quote-unquote, B17, is not actually a vitamin in any way, shape, form, or capacity. The definition of a vitamin is any group of organic compounds which are essential for normal growth and nutrition and are required in small quantities in your diet. They are required because they cannot be synthesized in the body. Vitamin B17, or amygdalin, does not fit the description of a vitamin. It is not a necessary thing for your body to function, and therefore does not fall into that category. In fact, its labeling as a vitamin has been used historically in order to make it sound more benign. Here's the thing with amygdalin, though. It can cause cyanide poisoning. In fact, actually, it's commonly found in apricot kernels, and if you eat 50 to 60 of those, it can be a lethal dose based on your body weight. I say that because I've read articles about people eating 30 of these seeds and kernels a day and not dying as a result and saying that it can't be toxic. Unfortunately, toxicity of any substance has to do with how much of it you ingest. Even something as toxic as arsenic can enter your body and not kill you. I should know, the middle school I grew up in actually had a high concentration of arsenic in the soil. Seriously, look up the history on Brown Bard's middle school. There was an entire controversy about the arsenic in the soil. It was found during that controversy that somebody would have to ingest the dirt in that area for 3 straight years every day in order to finally suffer side effects. So if somebody's eating a handful of these kernels a day and not suffering major side effects as a result, and then saying, aha, it can't be toxic because of that, they're bullshitting you. The most toxic substances on Earth can be benign in small enough doses.
Amygdalin contains glucose, benzaldehyde, and cyanide, and it is the latter which is believed to be the active cancer-fighting ingredient of letrol.
It is important to note, however, that cyanide is actually toxic to all cells, which makes the overall toxicity of letrol a concern. Yet studies suggest that letrol is more toxic to cancer cells than to normal cells.
Okay, so it labels it as a cancer-fighting agent, but here's the thing. Proponents of this particular woo don't actually agree on whether or not it's a preventative thing, or if it's a treatment thing. There are some people who espouse this particular woo who say that, oh, amygdalin is there to prevent the cancer from happening, and that's why it's a vitamin. There are others that say that the cyanide in the amygdalin is actually what fights the cancer once you have it. So once you have cancer, you can eat a bunch of apricot seeds to make it magically go away. It should be noted that there have been some studies involving cervical cancer and amygdalin where the cyanide did actually do some good. Problem is, amygdalin doesn't exactly target cancer cells specifically, so yeah, eat enough of these and you're still going to die. Cyanide doesn't care about you or your cancer, it's just going to kill you.
After all, your chances of getting cyanide poisoning from apple seeds or almonds are extremely slim, and we mustn't forget that cancer is toxic to begin with.
So technically this is true, cancer does fall under the definition of toxicity, since toxicity in medical terms, especially relating to cancer, is the extent to which something is poisonous or harmful. I make that distinction because things like toxicity or toxins are buzzwords in the woo industry. It's always good to point out when things are being used properly, just as it's important to point out when things are being used improperly. When they said that it's rare for somebody to die of eating apple seeds or almond seeds, there's a reason that it's rare. And that's because toxicity, just as I explained earlier, has to do with dosage. If I were to drink 3 liters of water right now, there is a chance, given my body weight, that it would kill me. And again, for the average person, the toxicity rate for apricot seeds and the cyanide within is 50 to 60 kernels. If you just go about saying it's rare for this to happen, people aren't going to know why, and they might actually end up having a toxic dosage. Why am I harping on this so hard? Well, that's because there were cases in Gaza in July of 1981 that were published in a scientific journal showing that multiple children were dying of cyanide poison because of eating too many apricot kernels. All it would take is one very concerned parent shoving this crap down their child's throat in order to stop their cancer to kill their child incredibly quickly. I'll be linking that article from Gaza down below, by the way. There were 2 different groups of children, both groups had sick children, and the larger the group of children, the larger the pool of deaths. A pool of 8 children had 1 death, and a pool of 16 children had 2 deaths. So yeah, after getting cyanide poison, it looks like you've got a pretty consistent 1 in 8 chance of dying. If you've already got a parent who doesn't trust the modern medical industry, I would argue that the chances of them actually seeking proper medical help after you've gotten cyanide poison is slim to none, and you're likely to succumb. Which is honestly really disgusting to think about. Let's continue.
You may be asking the following question.
If B17 is so powerful and helpful towards cancer elimination, then why is it not prescribed by modern physicians as a treatment?
Simple answer.
A control for cancer is known, and it comes from nature, but it is not widely available to the public because it cannot be patented, and therefore is not commercially attractive to the pharmaceutical industry.
So, you do realize that every single medicine we have ever created has been made from natural ingredients. We find the agents in particular plants that are responsible for giving us the beneficial effects in modern medicine, and we extract them so that they can be ingested later as syrups, pills, or medicine in a syringe. The mere fact that something occurs in nature does not automatically mean that it can't be patented. For instance, if you just took the amygdalin and put it into a pill, you would then be able to distribute it and sell it, thus making it commercially viable. But if you market something as a cancer cure, you're not actually selling medicine at that point, you're selling hope. And hope is probably one of the most dangerous things on this planet. Hope is what makes somebody stop taking painful chemotherapy and immediately go to the apricot seeds and dying within a few months. Hope is what makes people fall for prosperity ministries when they're down on their luck. Hope is suffering from an ailment but seeking a cure in colloidal silver and ingesting it constantly, which will be another Dangers of Woo episode later on down the road. The problem with hope is that it can be weaponized, and anybody who's good at marketing knows how to properly weaponize hope. Oh, and one more nail in the coffin for it not being profitable to sell something that's just a natural cure. St. John's wort is literally just an herb, but there are several people suffering from depression who willingly buy it every day in order to counteract their symptoms of depression, even though there have been no studies that show the efficacy of it higher than placebo. In the case of something like depression, placebo might be exactly what you need. It can help put you in the right mental state to deal with your issues. But if we're talking about something like cancer, a mental state is not going to help you in any way, shape, and form, especially if putting yourself in that more positive mental state prevents you from actually seeking helpful medicine. Even more so if you're a parent preventing your child from seeking actual medicine.
G. Edward Griffin. Dr. Sugura's research. Dr. Keimitsu Sugura spent the majority of his career at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and has authored more than 250 papers. He has also received numerous awards, one of which included the highest honors from the Japan Medical Association for outstanding contributions in cancer research. He specifically studied letrol and discovered that it showed very positive results with preventing malignant lung tumors in laboratory mice.
Interesting that you would cite that he has over 200 papers, but in your description you don't link a single one. So I did a little digging and found out that in 1972, he convinced a hospital to test latriol in mice, like you said. He found that it inhibited secondary tumors in mice and it didn't destroy the primary tumor. As soon as he took this into a blind test, though, he was unable to actually conclude that latriol had any anti-cancer activity whatsoever. The initial positive results weren't published immediately because the thing with science is that you have to start repeating these things. If something's not repeatable, it can't be concluded that's even beneficial. Latriol was then tested on 14 other tumor systems, and it was concluded that it showed no beneficial effects. As soon as the peer review process came in, 3 other researchers were unable to confirm his results at all. If you're unable to confirm the results in peer review, then the results can be pretty safely thrown away. But that's enough of that first video. It lays out the case for amygdalin, or vitamin B17, and I figured I'd go ahead and debunk that case. But we're not done yet. One of the biggest weapons that any type of woo can possibly have is the testimonial. If you have a convincing enough testimonial and enough of them, people will see if they can't replicate the results of the people showing positive testimonials. People want to repeat the success of others. So if somebody successfully beat cancer with a handful of apricot seeds, That sounds easy enough to do, and people will want to repeat it. One of the first, albeit not the most prolific cases of this, was from a woman named Sandy Rogg. She says in the following video that she actually managed to beat cancer. She has a link to both her blog and the worldwithoutcancer.uk website, which, it should be noted, seems to not have a secure connection on my end for some reason, and seems to only be talking about vitamin B17 and positive thought. So yeah, that can pretty easily be dismissed. Positive thought is a good thing to have, but it's not going to stop your cancer. Also, if you look at the navigation tabs on that website, it does seem to have an area talking about success stories. So again, testimonials. If you take a look at her website, you'll find that it's filled with her testimonial, her blog, a ton of Bible passages, which you know have medically sound advice, and of course her conspiracy theory against the FDA and her What is Vitamin B17 section. Oh, by the way, in her section about how much vitamin B17 you should take, it says that if you have a lot of cancer, you need to use a lot of B17. That seems like a really quick way to get your lethal dosage of apricot seeds. So forgive me if I call bullshit on your dangerous woo articles, but let's see what your testimonial says.
Hi, my name is Sandy, and I beat cancer with a vitamin. According to Dr. Krebs, you can too. B17 is a concentrated form of apricot kernels. It's also known as Laetrile or amygdalin. I can't say that name. I took 500 milligrams of it twice a day, and it wiped out 5 tumors.
So it should be noted that she did undergo chemotherapy, by the way. Past that, we know from medical studies that cancer can go into remission on its own. It's rare, but it does happen. Due to the early failures of amygdalin, there have not been controlled clinical trials on it. So your one anecdote isn't data. In fact, multiple anecdotes like yours still wouldn't be data.
And I had a total of 5 tumors, so I am now cancer-free. And I'm a mother of 4. I've been battling cancer for 2 years. I've done the conventional treatments for 2 years. 22-hour bags of chemo, 5-hour bags of chemo. Stayed a whole week in the hospital each time. Was sent home to be sick. And it took going through all that and then 5 more tumors arriving on the scene and them wanting to do more chemo. And I said, no, I'm done with it. And I got on this vitamin called B17. I had gotten it originally from my naturopathic doctor.
A naturopathic doctor? So, it should be noted that naturopathic doctors take a 4-year residency program postgraduate, which means they don't actually earn a doctorate, which means they aren't doctors. When looking up naturopathic medicine, the only things that I've been able to find is a boatload of controversy. That's because naturopathy is actually an alternative medicine, and alternatives to medicine aren't actually medicine. Alternative medicine that works is just called medicine. So the fact that you really didn't like your chemo, I can completely understand. Chemotherapy's harsh. Your naturopathic doctor is going to recommend you something that makes you feel good, and being able to just eat a handful of apricot seeds, or something concentrated into a tablet, feels much better than having to go through painful chemotherapy. But that's the problem, though. It's just helping you feel good. And if your cancer went into remission anyway, more power to you. Awesome. I don't want anybody to die from cancer. I've had enough loved ones die from cancer to not really have a good feeling in my stomach when I think about it. Unfortunately, though, we live in a world where simply feeling better about a situation does not inherently improve the situation. So the fact that you took naturopathic medicine and felt better as a result, because you were no longer on chemo, does not automatically mean that the naturopathic medicine actually helped you. And the fact that you went into remission, while good, does not mean that the naturopathic medicine led to you going into remission. Again, naturopaths are not real doctors, just as homeopaths are not real doctors.
And I found it on Amazon for a much cheaper price. And I just want to tell everybody, I've seen a lot of suffering. I've seen adults and children suffer for the last 2 years, and I don't want anybody else to have to suffer again.
Well, if you don't want people to suffer from things like cancer, then you shouldn't be advocating for a cancer treatment that doesn't actually treat the cancer, and in fact leads to people dying.
And I'm just telling my story. I'm not a doctor. I do not sell this stuff. I don't know the people that do. And B17 is not FDA approved.
Yes, there's good reasons for that. One, it's not a vitamin, and two, it's a poison. But I've made that readily apparent earlier in the video.
So, if you have cancer, take the reins into your own hands. Do your research. I found all this information in this book, World Without Cancer. And you can also find plenty of information in this book. All I know is I am cancer-free because of a vitamin. And I want other people to know so they can be cancer-free too. Thank you. Good luck.
Okay, but you're not cancer-free because of a vitamin. Correlation, again, does not equal causation. You can't simply say that I took vitamin B17, which, as I've said many times, isn't even actually a vitamin, and your cancer went away, therefore it had to be the vitamin B17. I'm sure you might have also drunk Diet Coke during that time. Did the Diet Coke fight your cancer? It should also be noted that both of the books that you've just showed aren't scientifically reviewed journals, which means that they can be filled with testimonies, anecdote, and even straight-up falsehoods because they don't have to be subject to peer review. And without them being subject to peer review, they could have literally anything in them at all. I feel like what you're saying is coming from a good place. There's a part in your heart that wants to help other people. Unfortunately, what you're doing is not actually helping other people. And I could go in and find other videos from other people who say the same thing. So, as per usual, when it comes to a Dangers of Woo episode, I usually have to point out the harm in the particular woo that we're talking about. So, unfortunately, here we have a lot of harm to go over. First and foremost, I already talked about weaponized hope. Weaponizing people's hope that they can fight the impossible is incredibly dangerous because you can lead them down the path of rejecting modern medicine that can actually help them, and instead taking something that is going to actively harm them, if not do nothing. Another issue that stems from this, of course, is parents refusing proper treatment for their children and instead advocating for naturopathic medicine like this. The next danger that we have to go over is the obvious dangers of ingesting copious amounts of cyanide. I don't think I should have to explain that ingesting multiple amounts of a poison is bad. Yes, you can work up a bit of a tolerance to it, and yes, if you eat smaller amounts, it's not going to harm you. But that's the thing, it's not going to be doing anything to your cancer either. At best, you're doing nothing, and at worst, you're ignoring proven medicine. And finally, the last danger that we have to talk about is the danger of holisticity. Specifically, the holisticity of cancer. By trying to form a holistic approach to cancer, you come up with this giant problem, and that's that cancers are unique. There are multiple types of skin cancer, there are lung cancers, prostate cancers, stomach cancers, liver cancers, brain tumors that are cancerous. These will all have to be dealt with on an individual basis, and many of them have different medical treatments involved in helping them. Some are more well-researched than others. When it comes to something like breast cancer or skin cancer, we typically have a better chance of getting rid of something like that than we do lung cancer. Trying to form a holistic approach to attacking them all at once doesn't actually attack any of them at all. And in fact, it allows you to cause the original problem of weaponizing hope in these people that there is a magic bullet that can cure their cancer. By aiding in this conversation, you are literally advocating for people to swallow poison in an effort to get rid of something that is actively killing them. Even if it's coming from a good place, you end up being a marketeer for death. And peddling death isn't exactly a good thing to do. So yeah, I would actively say this is a very dangerous style of woo, both in the fact that it engineers hope for a weapon and can actually kill you if misused. So, Twist, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will be making sure that there are more Dangers of Woo episodes dedicated to you as per your request. Thank you very much for your gracious donation, and I'd like to thank all of my other patrons for their donations as well. That said, if you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comment section below. If you have a friend or a loved one who does advocate for this, please send them this video. Subscribe and hit the bell notification icon if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next one. Oh, great. Just excellent. So you know how I announced last week that I was going to be doing a chiropractic episode? Well, as today's the day that I'm going to release it, lo and behold, guess what happened?
Oh, crap! Oh, my bleeding back! Jesus Christ! That's smart.
Yep, that's right. JonTron made a video about a chiropractor a day before I released mine. I know I'm not on his radar, so obviously this has nothing to do with me. I just can't wait for the comments that are going to be saying that I'm trying to ride on his coattails now, even though I released the thumbnail for the episode a week ago. So, screw it. Alright, as is tradition, let's go ahead and get into the fan art section. First off, we have Lizard Suris from Kitty, then we have a Neko Suris from Bumblebee, and finally we have a submission from a Facebook user, so I do not have their name, but this one is Rule 63 Cat Suris. Now, there's a lot of rules of the internet I guess I'm never going to escape. Thank you all for your submissions, and let's get right into the episode. So originally today I wanted to do this episode responding to one Dr. Bergman.
Cancer is not genetic. One of the reasons that we're in an epidemic of cancer is not from just the deficiency and toxicity of our environment. Now, you're building 1 billion cells a day. 10,000 of those cells are abnormal cells, or cancer cells.
But the more research I did about the guy, the more I realized that he deserves his own set of episodes completely separate from this topic. The topic at hand being chiropractic. Chiropractic has a very long history, and it is a form of alternative medicine mostly concerned with the diagnosis and treatment of mechanical disorders in the bones. Now, it should be noted that chiropractic medicine has a lot of conflicting results from its studies when trying to review any of the efficacy of its treatments. General consensus seems to be, however, that when it comes to some issues that reside strictly in the back, chiropractic medicine can be effective. The real problem becomes when a chiropractic practitioner tries selling you their pseudoscience, usually by claiming things like chiropractic will help with your digestive health.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about the digestive system. We're going to talk about digestive issues clearing up with chiropractic adjustments.
As if this is going to help my lactose intolerance. Or that this is going to stop me from having chronic migraines. This all stems from the underlying idea in chiropractic that the body's ails can be found in forms of subluxation. Subluxation is a partial dislocation of a vertebrae. There are different vertebrae that are assigned to different parts of the body, some that help with autoimmune systems, and others that help with digestive health, and others that help with pain management. The problem here, though, is that the idea of subluxation being the basis for medical problems stems from the idea that the body has an innate intelligence. Basically, the body knows best. These are ideas that actively reject the scientific consensus on medicine. The body does not necessarily know what's best, and if it did, people suffering from MS wouldn't have their immune systems constantly destroying their nerves. As with a lot of pseudoscientific woo, you can usually tell whether or not it's based in good science by simply looking at its origins. As for chiropractic, you can thank one Daniel David Palmer for founding the entire field of chiropractic. He was a huge proponent of alternative medicine such as magnetic healing and was an anti-vaxxer. And you know, when your medical professional, in quotation marks, is an anti-vaxxer, you can usually tell that it's time to walk right out the office. He believed that his medical knowledge about chiropractic came from an alternative plane of existence, and they were given to him from an intelligent spiritual being known as Dr. Jim Atkinson. He said that the method by which he obtained an explanation of certain physical phenomenon were from an intelligence in the spiritual world known in biblical language as inspiration. So basically, just imagine the entire method in which the Mormon religion was founded, and you may start to see some parallels. He also regarded chiropractic study as religious in nature. He viewed chiropractic as a religious duty of chiropractors, and he viewed the practice as a privilege that was conferred upon them. He said that it became of chiropractors to assert their religious rights. In fact, in 1966, the American Medical Association has called the chiropractic practitioner an unscientific cult. They boycotted it until losing an antitrust case in 1987. Chiropractic managed to maintain its position as something that people would rapidly flock to whenever they are suffering from various illnesses. But why is this the case? Well, aside from the fact that this may not actually be doing your body any good, it turns out that there actually are some benefits to chiropractic, especially when talking about the pain management side of things. If you are suffering from back pain resulting from a stiff back, having your back realigned is usually going to be an effective method of actually fixing that problem. Also, there are instances where you have pinched nerves, and chiropractors can usually help with pinched nerves given that surrounding tissue and bone pressure is what causes them in the first place, and their entire shtick is relieving that pressure. So there are actually some physical things that they can definitely help with. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, that there are certain things that chiropractic can help with. The issue, however, doesn't come down to whether or not chiropractic can help with things. The issue comes with the scope in which chiropractitioners generally believe their practice can be helpful. And it is because of this scope, as well as the previously mentioned points about pain management and pinched nerves, that have allowed them to continue to be popular. People in America in general suffer from various types of pain, and ways to manage this pain are always going to be sought out in high demand. If anyone is offering you an effective way to get rid of that pain, then you're going to probably buy it. And since, for the most part, we use our backs for everything from lifting to maintaining our posture while we're sitting at office chairs, chiropractic is going to offer a ready-made pain management tool. But what about the other side of chiropractic that I mentioned, the one that might not be as ethical? Well, as it turns out, in 2008, a commentary was proposed that chiropractic may actually need to regulate itself in order to combat abuse within its circles. There's a lot of fraud and quackery in chiropractic. Quackery seems to be a lot more prevalent in chiropractic than it is in any other medical field. Given that chiropractic began as literal quackery, this makes sense. And in most cases, if it quacks like a duck, you can go ahead and assume it's a duck. Chiropractors, especially here in the United States, tend to unnecessarily treat patients. This is because chiropractic, even though it is useful in pain management in some cases, it is marketed in many cases as a preventative tool. This would mean that patients are returning to a chiropractor more often than they would normally need to because it's being viewed as a type of preventative medicine. A lot like taking any of your various prescriptions that you might have in order to prevent yourself from being sick. I know for me, I have chronic allergies, so I do have to take a certain amount of allergy meds in order to keep myself from falling over at the first sign of pollen. As a result of chiropractic being marketed as a tool of prevention as opposed to a tool of healing, many people end up getting a lot of chiropractic adjustments that they don't actually need, and it should be noted that any manipulation of the spine that is unnecessary always comes with a level of risk. The more you manipulate the spine, the more chances of having actual problems occur from that manipulation. Looking at websites from chiropractors, you can generally find that a lot of them actually talk about benefits that aren't supported by science. There was an analysis of this in 2010 which found that the majority of chiropractic websites and their associations made claims of effectiveness that weren't supported by any scientific evidence. Only 28% of chiropractors actually advocated that they were there for helping with lower back pain, which is one of the few things that actually contained sound evidence. There was even a point in time where 500 individual chiropractors all had formal complaints being thrown at them for false advertising. This caused a lot of chiropractors to remove leaflets that actually had claims about helping with whiplash and colic from their practice. When this happened, the British Chiropractic Association tried to file a lawsuit against Simon Singh, who had inspired this filing of mass complaints. A year later, they ended up withdrawing their suit. Wonder why? As was shown in the video from JonTron that released yesterday, which I might as well link in the description below because it is tangentially related and it's hilarious. Some chiropractors actually try to market their own products as seen on TV items.
Hi, I'm John Creemans. Welcome to our show, Living Without Back Pain.
And I'm going to go ahead and say it right now, if my doctor is acting more like a used car salesman than a medical professional, I'm probably going to be running out the door. And given that a 2003 profession-wide survey found that most chiropractors still hold views of the body's innate intelligence of knowing what's best, it's fairly safe to say that even in recent years, a majority of chiropractors are still woo practitioners. Again, as I said before, there are some things that chiropractic can help with. But let me be abundantly clear. This will not help with anything except pain management and some spinal problems. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know that it's not the usual video response, but I wanted to go ahead and get some more informative stuff out, and Dangers of Woo usually is a good place for that. This episode's gonna have a long list of sources, so I hope you guys are ready to read, because, as with anything, I would hope you guys fact-check me. That's why this channel's called Suris the Skeptic, not Suris the Atheist, or Suris the Lefty, or Suris the whatever. Anywho, today we're gonna be talking about crime and race, because I never bring up any contentious topics on my channel ever. Alright, so the first thing is that you may be wondering why this is a Dangers of Woo episode, considering that something about racism is more of a social issue. And the reason for that is that a lot of racism is actually rooted pretty heavily in pseudoscience. Or rather, most people who are racist end up finding pseudoscience that they use post hoc in order to justify their racism. If I can give two examples of this, one is the oft-used statistic that white Americans have on average an IQ of 100 and black Africans have on average an IQ of 70. Except the research that was used for that not only said nothing about the actual race of the people involved. That particular study has everything to do with the people in a region, not necessarily the race that they are. And the concept of race really just boils down to phenotypical expression, not cognitive function. But I'm going to end up doing an entire video about that later on. The one I want to focus on right now is this idea that race is somehow linked to crime. But before I get into that, let's go ahead and get the fan art out of the way, because a heavy-handed episode like this needs a little respite. First of all, we have the real Suris from Let's Alex. If anybody's seen my live streams, you know that's the plushie version. Then me next to Shattered Reaper by Shattered Reaper. And then finally, the Lord of Lewd himself makes my expression every time I deal with biblical gender roles. As usual, thank you guys for the fan art, and let's get into the meat of the video. So, have you ever actually heard this phrase before? Despite making up only 13% of the population, African Americans are responsible for more than 53% of the crimes. Chances are you've probably heard some variant of this before. But the real question is, why? Well, we can actually kind of dig into the meat of that. First of all, we have to get a few things out of the way. For one, for a crime to be documented, and therefore be part of the statistic, someone has to be caught in the act of that crime, or caught after the fact, or stopped before they could. This means that, in theory, if two particular streets were patrolled by 2 cops each, and 5 crimes were committed on both streets at the same time, then theoretically, there should be at least 2 arrests on both streets, meaning that if no reinforcements are brought into this thought experiment, at least 4 crimes will be reported, 2 on each street. These are the crimes that will be attributed to this statistic. If the other 6 crimes are not documented, the 3 that have gone unchecked on each street, then none of that will be accounted for in data. However, if we took the same number of cops and same number of crimes, but instead put 3 cops on Street A and 1 cop on Street B, there's now a potential of 3 arrests on Street A and 1 arrest on Street B. Even if the same number of crimes are being committed on both streets, if we can only catch and document more crimes on the first street because of heavier policing, then in data it would look like that street is responsible for 75% of the crimes between these 2 streets. This is just a quick and dirty thought experiment to show how over-policing in one area and lack of police representation in another can lead to an uninformed statistic. Now that we have the thought experiment out of the way, we have to actually figure out whether or not this is a thing that happens in real life. A thought experiment is only as useful as its application. So the question is, do we actually see over-policing in predominantly black neighborhoods, and thus more potentials for crimes to be caught and documented? Well, it turns out the problem is a little more complicated than just over-policing. One study, called The Impact of Race on Policing and Arrests, actually found that there was a higher propensity for white officers to arrest black citizens, but also found that the opposite was true. Black officers would arrest white citizens more often as well. I'll be linking that study in the description, as I always do, but what we can assume from that study is that if a white officer were to police a predominantly black area, it would be more likely that he would arrest people more often. And the converse would be true. From there, we would assume that if we had more white officers than black officers, then we would have more arrests of black citizens. It wouldn't be the only explanation, but it most certainly would be one valid one. The question becomes, how many white officers do we have compared to black officers in the force? Well, another study called Diversity in the Force, where police don't mirror communities, found that black officers really only accounted for 10% of the police force on average, while white police officers made up over 60%. Now, in the meme that I said earlier, what was that percentage? 50% of the crimes? That seems to be the exact number disparity between white and black officers in their respective policing areas. But we still don't have a full case. That's only one set of meta-analysis on data and one set about population. Both of those studies will be in the description. So we have a little bit of data to show the difference in how often minority groups would be arrested and the possible whys. We don't necessarily have an underlying cause, but there are some steps to figuring that out that have been taken. As of 2019, another study called Racial Profiling in Searches, Did the Politics of Racial Profiling Change Police Behavior?, found that police behavior actually was changed quite greatly based on the media representation of different minority groups in their given areas. This meant if you lived in a predominantly racist area and the media reflected that, then you would also find a disproportionately high amount of arrests. Now, the only problem I have with this study is that it was centralized in North Carolina, so it's harder to expand that idea to the rest of the United States on the whole, unlike the study that was done by Yale, but it is one more drop in the bucket to show where the underlying problem is. So now in our case, we know that racial profiling not only exists within the police force, but it can be at least somewhat accounted for by measuring implicit media bias in the area. We also know that if you have a predominantly white police force, you're going to see a higher amount of black citizens arrests. This is further evidenced by another study that I'm going to be providing in the description called Racial Bias in Police Investigations. This is one of the more recent studies I found, being from 2018, and it utilized traffic citations from car crashes, since it was one of the most non-random methods to determine whether or not police officers were generally arresting people who were races other than themselves. And what did that study find? Well, it found the same damn thing. It found that when officers were working crash sites, they were more likely to give tickets to people who were of another race than them. This was found amongst all races surveyed in the study, and it's a 37-page long study, so I hope you're ready for some reading. So again, all the numbers seem to pan out to mean one thing. On average, people of every race will arrest people who are not the same race as them. Therefore, if we have a majority of one race in the police department, we would expect to find that minority races will be disproportionately accounted for in crime statistics. And that is exactly what the data meets out. As for the argument of racial bias, is there a way we can measure that? Well, actually, yes. This is by utilizing something called the Stroop effect. The Stroop paradigm shows that there are going to be certain colors associated with words. For instance, when you think of the word blue, the color blue comes to mind and vice versa. It becomes very hard, then, to actually read the word blue if the word itself is colored orange. As a result, we can actually measure what colors people associate with certain words, like violent or criminal. And in chapter 28 of Social Cognition, we find a chapter called The Police Officer's Dilemma, using ethnicity to disambiguate potentially threatening individuals. Through using a variation of the Stroop effect that was modified to account for race instead of just colors, it was found that on average, every single police officer, not just white ones, saw that behavior from an African American, even if it mirrored that of a white person, was seen as more mean and threatening. This doesn't mean that the person of color was actually more threatening. This has everything to do with a schema that was already built in the person's mind, which correlates with the data that we found from the North Carolina study. That media and outward influence, which is how we develop schemas in our mind, do in fact have an impact on how threatening a police officer finds any given individual. And that threat assessment directly correlates with the amount of arrests that we have. So now we know that this problem is at least twofold. On the one hand, we have more representation for white cops, which we know has a direct result on the amount of black arrests that will be happening. We also know that on average, thanks to the Stroop paradigm, there is a difference in color bias, which would further compound the problem that was shown from the previous data. Now, if you remember my previous point about throwing more officers into a particular street, leading to more arrests, and more importantly for the data, more documented arrests, there's a reason I brought that up. There's a concept called gentrification that has long since divided many areas of our country. In short, gentrification is the process of renovating or improving any house or district so that it conforms more to middle-class standards. Now, this is a bit of a problem considering that the middle class is a shrinking space in the United States. Now, while this sounds like a good thing on paper, you're increasing the value of any given living area, the problem is that people who are already living in that area are usually living right at their means, or slightly above or below. However, what was found that in 2003 alone, over 200,000 renters were forced to move out of their neighborhoods because the neighborhoods had been remodeled into higher class versions. This ends up displacing many people if they can't afford the new rates. In Washington, D.C. alone, more than 20,000 African American citizens were displaced, and that was just in a 10-year span after the year 2000. 40% of all of their low-income neighborhoods ended up experiencing gentrification, which caused the displacement. Arrests and calls for investigations on African American citizens in D.C. increased so much that law enforcement in 2015 had to finally tell residents to stop calling on their black neighbors for mundane behavior. People were getting the police called on them for barbecuing outside, smoking, or even noise ordinances. I'll provide a news article for that, but suffice to say, the problem ended up being that predominantly white neighbors were calling on their black neighbors in a desperate attempt to get them to stop what they had been doing for decades. Stuff that was harming no one, and it was leading to a sharp uptick in arrests, all for mundane things. Because of these calls, predominantly African American areas that had been gentrified were becoming over-policed, and it was leading to a sharp uptick in crimes documented. And these crimes were usually of a very mundane nature, but they still end up being accounted for in the overall statistic. Please bear in mind what I said about the North Carolina study, however. You can't always expand this data to the entirety of the nation, so please take this part with a grain of salt. If we were to take the North Carolina study from before and use that as a small example to extrapolate from the rest of the nation and try to do the same thing with Washington, D.C., then we're getting an even clearer picture of why the crime statistic looks the way that it does. And this brings me to why this is actually a Dangers of Woo episode above anything else. It's long been hypothesized by race realists that there's a genetic component to crime, that these things start from the inside out as opposed to from the outside in. Hell, if you want a dystopian example of this, go ahead and read the Divergent series. This idea is literally everywhere, but that's the pseudoscientific part of it. There may be small genetic components like aggression that can be attributed to crime, but these components do not always necessarily correlate with racial structures. However, there are people that find themselves being incredibly racist and then finding data like the IQ study that I'm going to tackle in another episode, or the crime statistics across the United States, the 13 to 50 problem, and use that as a type of confirmation bias in order to assert that their racism was justified. Or the other explanation that I've heard many times is that statistics can't be racist. And you're right, statistics can't be racist, but the way that I've seen this employed has almost universally been to cite the statistic and then say, make of it what you want, when the person citing the 1350 statistic is speaking to a largely racist audience, or has said some racist talking points before and then says the statistic. While they may be saying make of that what you want, it's very clear what they're wanting you to make of it. To think that there's some genetic component to crime and that that genetic component is linked to black people somehow. But so far, we've only talked about the police force. There's a lot more to the justice system than just that. What happens after the arrest? Well, you know how previously I talked about how implicit bias actually allows racial profiling to proliferate? Turns out that that extends to every level of the justice system. In the Quarterly Journal of Economics, volume 127, there was a study called The Impact of Jury Race in Criminal Trials. It'll be in the description if you want to read it, but to summarize what was found, if you had a white jury, they were more likely to convict a black citizen, no matter what the crime was. There was a noticeable gap in convictions when a white jury judged a white person and a white jury judged a black person. But what happened when just a single member of the jury was black? Just one. Well, that gap ended up getting closed immediately, almost as if the racial bias was accounted for by having a member of that race as part of the judging squad. But then you might be asking if this is actually a right or left issue. If we ignore all the problems with how the Overton window is shifted over to the right in the United States, let's go ahead and take our classic right and left parties that we have here, the Republicans and the Democrats. We've already moved past the data of racial discrimination in the arrests and in the convictions, but what about the sentencing? Well, we did actually find that on average, black Americans were sentenced to about 3 months more prison time when a Republican judge was the one sentencing them. These are median differences and are actually found to increase the more discretion a judge is allowed. That's not me trying to paint all Republicans in a bad light, that's just me showing a point of data that shows that a lot of this bias seems to come from the right wing. And as usual, I will be providing that source in the description. But outside of the political aspect of it, what if we just look at the race of the people being sentenced in the first place? Well, let's take a single thing that is viewed by the majority of America as a crime, marijuana use, and see what we find with that statistic. Well, as it turns out, the ACLU reports that white and black Americans both seem to use marijuana at the same rate, yet when it comes to arrest for possessions, black Americans are 3.73 times more likely to be arrested for possession. They generated this report utilizing publicly available census population data and arrest data. Now, in the article that I'm providing on that, this does lead us to another problem, in that there are politicians who are citing incorrect data to make this problem sound larger than it actually is. So let's break it down. Yes, There is a disparity in arrests in the United States, and on average, black citizens are treated worse by the judicial system. Every source that I've provided and every point of data suggests this. It also suggests that this is done without just cause, all basically boiling down to racial profiling and implicit bias. But when people inaccurately cite statistics, it ends up giving ammo to the race realists on the other side, because people who are doing their best to fix a problem in the United States end up doling out some exaggerated information and not supporting their side very well as a result. This is why, above all else, my channel is a skeptic channel. If I found data that suggested that there was not a racial disparity problem in the United States, then I would be providing sources on that. But instead, that's not what the data shows. But at the end of the day, what's the purpose of an episode like this? Well, it's basically a giant information dump that you can hold on to whenever you hear somebody cite the improperly used, despite 13% of the population meme. So, let me repeat it one last time. If someone is saying in an argument or just in conversation that despite making up only 13% of the population, black people are responsible for only 50% of the crime, and not offering any type of explanation further than that, they are, above all else, selling you woo, pseudoscientific nonsense used as a method of confirmation bias to allow race realists to justify racism. Anywho, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Please, please, please check out all the references that I have in the description. I had to do a lot of reading for this one, but I hope the end product was worth it for you guys. If you guys enjoyed the video, please subscribe, please like, send it to your friends, all that good stuff. Your genes made you do it. You were born that way. I'm gonna use this as both the worst excuse to be an ally and as an apologetic for racism. Let's go. Alrighty guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a wonderful time so far. If not, maybe I'll be able to fix that. And if I do, please go ahead and feel free to subscribe and hit that like button. Also hit the bell notification icon if you want to know when new episodes come out. If you want to see episodes early as well as other goodies, please feel free to drop by over on my Patreon and see if you want to do that. Even just $1 a month helps out a ton, and it gives you access to episodes several days in advance. Finally, obligatory merch store plug, grab a Neko Suris hoodie so you can have cat boobs on your chest. And speaking of a place that has plenty of cat boobs, usually, let's move into the fan art section. We have an incredibly happy Suris by Meme Lord TV, a Neko Suris by MJ Sketchy, and a Very H Suris by Wombologist, which I'll totally use as a plug for a Very H mug. And with all that said, let's go ahead and get into talking about jeans. Not those kind of jeans. I'm a bit fat and I barely fit into them. But no, the jeans that make up practically every facet of your being. There's two bad apologetics I've heard when it comes to jeans, and one side is one that I fight for, and the other one is one that I absolutely cannot stand. That would be LGBTQ rights, and of course racists. I'm sure if you've been watching my channel long enough, you know exactly which side I'm on. Let's start with the warrior gene and then work backwards. When I did another similar Dangers of Woo episode, the 1351, one of the things I saw in my comment section a lot on that video, and also had people levy against me during live streams, was that my defense that socioeconomic factors and media bias had a lot to do with the 1350 violent crime statistic was off base because apparently black people, according to these commenters, had something called the warrior gene, and that made them predisposed to violent crime. At first, I just dismissed this notion entirely because it sounded stupid, and then I spent some time to do some research. This is because one of the apologetics I've heard from these same types of people is that black people are genetically predisposed for crime, and therefore are genetically inferior to white people in some way. But when the conversation moves to homosexuals or trans individuals, the argument suddenly changes. Now, all of these things are a choice, and they are choices that apparently need to be condemned for some reason, because they affect some people somehow. So, is there actually any merit to the warrior gene? Well, yes and no. And this ties into LGBTQ people as well. Give me a second so I can take you on this interesting but somewhat convoluted journey. The gene in question when it comes to predispositions for violent crime is monoamine oxidase A. It popularly gained the title warrior gene because there are a few flaky links between variations of this gene and aggression. Now, let's go ahead and see some of the common cases in which this gene has been used as an apologetic for violent behavior. A few years back, there was a murderer named Bradley Waldrop, whose defense attorneys actually ordered a test and established that he had the warrior gene. A biological defense was levied for his case, in order to argue some scientific rationale for diminishing his responsibility in the murders that he took part in. The variation of MAOA is linked to an underactive prefrontal cortex. This is an area of the brain that inhibits antisocial impulses. In Waldrop's case, defense expert William Burnett argued that a combination of his warrior gene variant and being abused as a child created a dangerous mix of circumstances that led him to be who he is today, thereby attempting to remove a lot of the responsibility for his actions. According to one of the jurors, Debbie Beatty, a diagnosis is a diagnosis, and it's there. A bad gene is a bad gene. The problem, though, is that pseudoscience and woo are still pseudoscience and woo no matter how convincing they are. So let's get into some of the issues with the MAOA gene. The first obvious one is that almost everyone has this gene, and the specific variation that was linked to increased aggressive behavior is present in 34% of the population in Europe. And it's present in everyone of every skin color. There doesn't seem to be an actual link between the two. And when it comes to trying to determine someone's violent behavior as a result of this gene, the actual violent crime statistics in Europe aren't representative of this number of people with the predisposition at all. The violent crime stats are much lower. Less than 3% of the population actually commit violent crime, versus the 34% of the population that have this gene. So not only is it incredibly hard to actually call that gene a causal factor in violent crime, the numbers would suggest that there's barely even a correlative link, when one of those is usually pretty easy to establish. So what's actually to blame in these situations? Well, the variation of the MAOA gene that's considered responsible for this type of violent behavior, as I said earlier, lowers the activity in the prefrontal part of the brain, the part that allows you to determine whether or not a particular antisocial behavior is, well, antisocial or harmful. When faced with social exclusion or ostracism, individuals with the low-activity MAOA gene tend to show slightly higher levels of aggression than people with the high-activity, or norm, MAOA gene. What we get from this, though, is that the proclivity for violent or aggressive behavior is about as causal as high blood pressure. One thing that could be determined was that chance to retaliate was identical between people with low and high-activity MAOA genes. However, response to greater threats, where a high amount of loss could be perceived, was slightly higher in people with the low-activity MAOA gene. This means the only time that this gene is actually going to cause any type of effect in the individual that we can perceive is when a threatening situation of such significance has happened, that retaliation would almost certainly be a form of self-defense, meaning that even though Waldrop's defense attorneys were able to successfully get him off of death row, his defense attorneys effectively just sold the jury a bunch of snake oil. Studies have shown that any variation of this gene does not lead to somebody going on a murderous rampage. What we have found is that there are some, and a lot, of possible genetic links that increase aggression, like I said before, high blood pressure. What this means is that while there is a small genetic component to aggression, it seems that all that does is give a foundation that is then influenced heavily by environmental or societal factors. Like, for instance, males being perceived as being more aggressive and expected to be more aggressive, taught that being aggressive is masculine, and then ultimately being 2 to 3 times more statistically significant in violent crimes as a result. Now, I recognize that opens up the floodgates for a different type of apologetic once we start applying this exact same logic to homosexuals. This is where religious people will start to say, aha, that means that being gay is a choice, just like murder. Except no, that's not what it means. Allow me to show you guys some more research. Some massive studies have been done into the genetics of homosexuality, and many of them have concluded as of this year. So what did we find? Well, in a genetics conference in 2018, it was reported that there were 5 genetic variants associated with having a same-sex sexual partner. Also of note, the frequency of occurrence of gay individuals was increased in families that had siblings that were also gay, implying that there was at least some genetic aspect to being gay. And while we have found that there are several genetic variants that are associated with possibly being gay, what we found was that the variants of these genes, called SNPs, don't predict people's sexual behaviors. This means that there is no gay gene that determines whether or not someone has same-sex partners. The familial studies that showed a link between siblings and homosexuality also showed that there was about a 32% heritability of homosexual behavior, but that each individual SNP, or single nucleotide polymorphism, had a very small effect on whether or not someone would actually ever have a same-sex partner. Taking into account all SNPs measured in the study, this really only explained about about 8 to 25% of the heritability of same-sex behavior. If we were to focus on the 5 statistically significant SNPs, though, then it only explains 1% of behavior now, meaning that much like with the warrior gene, the actual end result of these genes that lead to predispositions is less than 3%, which means that they're statistically insignificant. We can't predict that somebody's going to be gay based on their genes, just like we can't predict that somebody's going to be aggressive based on their genes. So what tool do we actually get to use here? Well, instead of trying to use some genetic scale to determine whether or not somebody's gay, it seems to be that something like the Kinsey scale accurately predicts men's arousal when shown erotic pictures instead. Ultimately, this means that both with violent behavior and with homosexuality, there are environmental factors and there are biological factors at play that ultimately lead you to be who you are. It's the age-old nature versus nurture thing. But if we're focusing on the homosexual side of this genetics issue, that means that there's going to be at least one religious apologist who uses my video to say, aha, of course, it's not genetic, that means it's a choice. Except that's not what it means. You can't change who or what you're attracted to. This goes for fetishes, kinks, and even people. The environmental factors at play that shape one's attraction usually happen during the very formative years, and the biological components also have a lot to do with what hormones one was exposed to early in life. These are both factors that are largely outside of someone's control, as during the formative years you are typically under the guardianship of someone else, or at the very least, you don't exactly have your own autonomy yet. You don't have the ability to change your hormones at this stage, and you have zero ability to change your environment, which means that the goalposts would then be shifted for the religious apologist to say that, well, they can't control who they're attracted to, sure, but they can control whether or not they engage in homosexual acts, which are of course considered a sin to many Christians. And if they're a smart apologist and really want to lock me in a logical bind, they would reference to the first 6 minutes of this video where I mentioned that committing those crimes is still going to be a choice of the individual, regardless of the societal and biological factors involved. But again, if this is the apologetic that someone wants to bring up when dealing with this pseudoscience woo and all of the other nonsense, my response is going to be, there's a difference between homosexual sex and murder. Ultimately, outside of the sin argument, the only argument you can have against homosexuality is that you personally find it gross, as opposed to murder, where there's an actual effect that can be determined here. If you are one of these religious apologists and you want to see what the difference between sex and murder is, then I invite you to go to my affiliate, DDLG Playground, pick up a toy and some bondage gear, please use the coupon code Suris so you get 10% off, and kindly go screw yourself. Or if you've got a partner, screw them too. And when you wake up the next day and nothing significant has changed in your life, you'll know that there is a functional difference between sex and murder. Because had you murdered them or yourself, the next day would be significantly different. I don't know why that's the way I ended up explaining that. Anywho, point is, when it comes to things like murder, thievery, and other things that we consider crimes, these are things that actually impact other people's lives. If your brother is murdered, there's a huge impact on your life and everybody around them. If they're stolen from, there's another huge impact. If somebody randomly pegs them in the anus, that really isn't going to change much, as long as all parties involved consented. So what's our conclusion here? Well, the conclusion is that the warrior gene cannot be used as an apologetic to say that black people are somehow genetically inferior to white people, both because everyone has that gene, and the variation linked to aggression is in all races, insofar as humans even have races, and because we found that it's both biological and environmental factors that ultimately lead to people's decisions. Attempting to dismiss the socioeconomic status of any individual and dial everything back to genetics doesn't do you any good. The science isn't in your favor. When it comes to the similarly structured gay gene argument, no, being gay is not a choice. Unless you can find some way to change the environmental factors and the few biological factors involved, then you're not going to be able to make attraction to anyone of any kind a choice. But I mentioned a bad apologetic when it came from LGBTQ people who I fight for on my channel routinely, and that is the being gay is a choice argument. This is a common defense when someone says that I didn't have a choice in being gay, therefore what I want to do is okay. There's a reason this is a bad argument, and it's the reason I decided to talk about these two issues simultaneously. Whether or not being gay is a choice, unlike something like murder, there's no impact to it. There's no negative impact at all. And any secular argument against it will fall flat on its ass, much like when Mike Winger tried to make his secular argument against homosexuality. If we found out tomorrow that being gay was most certainly a choice, it wouldn't suddenly make being gay wrong. It wouldn't make homosexual sex wrong. Hell, it wouldn't even make 30-person dogpile orgies wrong. So stop treating being gay like it's something you should be ashamed of. Stop hiding behind the fact that it's not a choice. While all research suggests that it's most certainly not a choice, stop treating homosexuality like murder. That's the real dangers of woo here. Trying to dial everything back to genetics to use pseudoscience to fight on either side of this argument. This is junk pseudoscience that's used to excuse racism and to either create bad apologetics for or bad and bigoted arguments against homosexuality.
You know, I haven't done a Dangers of Woo episode in a while. Like, a long while. What kind of pseudoscience do people have up their butts these days? Oh, I didn't know this was going to be a literally thing. Alright, what's up everybody? This is Dangers of Woo, a series that I started way when my channel began, but I kinda stopped doing. The premise of the Dangers of Woo series is to debunk pseudoscience specifically, as opposed to sitting in the realm of video responses. If there's some pseudoscience that you want to see covered, then please send it to me and I will gladly do what I can. That said, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon, all that other fun stuff. I'm skipping fan art today just because I want to get right into the video itself. So apparently there's this company called Endomed, and it's based in southern San Francisco, and it's made a new, quote-unquote, product recently that it wants to push onto, well, you guys. And me too, considering that I'm morbidly obese, and this is definitely the product for me, right? They are Tapeworm Miracle Diet Pills. They are a once-a-week pill that, when ingested, cause the patient to lose as much weight as they want on a steady basis while allowing them to eat whatever they want, which is like the claim that practically every diet pill ever has. The rationale behind how this works is apparently these are genetically modified beef tapeworms. When the eggs hatch into your system as you eat food, the worms will slowly eat any excess calories and therefore allow you to eat whatever the hell you want. This is because tapeworms are parasites. They gain all of their food by sitting inside your stomach and leeching off the calories that you eat. The pills that Endomed is peddling apparently come in groups of 10, and it's stated that it's not wise to go over 10 pills or the weekly advised dosage, because then you're literally eating too many tapeworms, and, well, if you've got too many tapeworms inside you, then that can cause some problems, which we will get into later. First, let's talk about whether or not this would work. On an intuitive level, it seems like it should function perfectly fine. For instance, if you need to eat 1,800 calories in order to lose weight at your current weight goals, then eating 2,500 calories and having the excess 700 calories devoured by the tapeworm, ideally this would mean that you can eat whatever the hell you want and even eat some unhealthy foods that are laden with grease, sugars, and anything you want, because the excess calories will just be devoured by the hungry tapeworms. There are some catches though. You see, the pills that Endomed are specifically using, they have tapeworms that have a lifespan of a week. They suggest that you wait until you naturally pass your tapeworm before you actually ingest more pills, but there are some things to consider, and I would think this goes without saying. There's no way to control exactly how much food a tapeworm will ingest inside your body, and this has some consequences which we will see before. But first of all, I did wonder when I first read about this, is there any historical significance to this? Have we seen this diet before? And it turns out, with a lot of things with history, that answer is kind of complicated. You see, apparently back in the Victorian era, tapeworms were a fad diet, or rather, they were said to be a fad diet. This is because even though there are some advertisements for tapeworm pills from back then, I wasn't able to dig up any information that said whether or not the pills were placebo. A lot of this surrounds a myth around opera singer Maria Callas, who was reported to have eaten parasites to try to lose weight. That has been debunked as a bit of a myth, but the methods they supposedly used back then would be by swallowing tapeworm cysts, usually in the form of a pill, but harvested off the tongue of beef cows. The theory they ran with was that the tapeworms would reach maturity inside the intestines and absorb food. Unfortunately, along with the weight loss this was supposed to cause, it would also cause diarrhea and vomiting. Once a person reached their desired weight, they needed to take a pill, which would, well, help you expunge the tapeworm. Tapeworms can grow up to 30 feet in length, and they can also cause many other complications besides the desired effect of weight loss. I already mentioned the diarrhea and vomiting. but you can also have headaches, eye problems, meningitis, epilepsy, and dementia just for having a tapeworm in your system. These particular pills became advertised in the 19th century since advertising was becoming a lot more sophisticated, and even though people had been dieting for hundreds of years, the 19th century was about when we saw the birth of the fad diet. There are some other fad diets from the past that I'd like to talk about in other episodes, namely things like arsenic and the chew and spit diet, which literally involved chewing and spitting your food out instead of actually digesting it. But those are things for another episode. So as we dial back up to the modern day, we've already established that tapeworms were maybe used back in the day. It's not really 110% confirmed. What we do know is that at least some advertisements existed about them, and whether or not the pills were placebos or legitimately had the cyst tapeworm eggs they were supposed to have, the fact remains that people desperate to lose weight did in fact want to ingest tapeworms back then when less information was available about them. And now that more information is available about them, let's see if there's anything oh, okay. Apparently Khloe Kardashian suggested that she wanted to get a tapeworm on Keeping Up with the Kardashians. It evoked an article from Vice on the legitimacy and dangers of the diet, and it should be noted that regardless of your stance on the FDA has banned tapeworm pills. Now, why would people go to such lengths to get these pills? I've already noted they have several complications, but a lot of this is rooted in the idea that beauty is pain. This is an idea that was echoed all throughout Victorian culture. Remember, this was the age of things like the corset, crumpling of feet in order to make them smaller. The idea of putting yourself through immense physical pain in order to achieve a better look was basically just how people comported themselves all the time. Like, right now, we have the idea of going to the gym in order to lose weight, or dieting in order to lose weight, but back then there were some more extreme methods that people were willing to go through, and there are still people who enjoy things like corseting nowadays. The difference is corseting is more of a hobby now, whereas back then this was considered the norm. If you didn't corset, then you ended up looking incredibly plain compared to other people. But so far, we've been dealing with everything in the realm of theory, strictly the hypothetical, because we kind of have to. There aren't actually a lot of studies on the effects of tapeworms as used as a dieting method, so a lot of what we have to do is take the evidence of how tapeworms work when they're ingested without consent, and then kind of apply those to the idea of using tapeworms as a dieting method. That said, I was able to actually find at least one article where a Dr. Michael Fosley decided to try the tapeworm diet himself, took a tapeworm, and then documented all of his findings. So, like we mentioned before, intuitively, it should technically work. A tapeworm can eat many things in your body and prevent you from ingesting those calories yourself, and then, of course, even though there are those complications, there's no beauty without pain, right? So, what did Dr. Michael Mosley actually find out? Well, Mosley traveled to Kenya in order to pick up his parasites, harvesting them from cows' tongues, like was said to have been done in the past, and then ingested tapeworms and tracked his progress for about 6 weeks. So, there are a few things to be noted. First of all, even though Indomed claims that the lifespan of the tapeworms they're using is 1 week, a tapeworm could live in a person's body for up to 20 years. Regardless, Mosley decided to keep his diary for 6 weeks instead of 20 years, but then again, he did this in 2014, so he would have been able to do 20 years of this. What he found was that even though he tried his best not to change his diet, he wanted to maintain eating everything that he normally did and see if he lost any weight, the tapeworm had an adverse effect on him, and not just the diarrhea and other complications that come with tapeworms, this one was a bit unexpected. You see, with the body losing so many of its nutrients to the tapeworm, I mentioned before you can't exactly control how much the tapeworm eats, Mosley's body started giving him cravings. Cravings for carbohydrates and sugars, things that could be very quickly digested, and then of course turned into quick energy for the body, or in this case, quick energy for the tapeworm. As a result, he ended up gaining about 2 pounds during his experiment. Instead of losing any weight, he just ended up gaining weight. Eventually, he had to take medication to get rid of the tapeworms, and luckily he had no lasting symptoms. So even though this is not a meta-study or a giant analysis on multiple people taking the tapeworm diet, what Mosley's findings seem to indicate, at least in the anecdote,
is that if you are wanting to lose weight, the tapeworm diet is not going to work, because any of the benefits that the tapeworm diet gives you are offset by what happens when you have a tapeworm in your system. The actual things your body starts craving are the exact opposite of the things you need to be ingesting in order to lose weight in the first place. This is, of course, not even considering the fact that ingesting tapeworms is already incredibly risky due to all the other complications that can come from having the worms. So not only will you have fever, diarrhea, vomiting, and all the other unpleasant stuff that can come from having the tapeworms, including, epilepsy, you will be undergoing all of that stress for no actual gain. The tapeworm diet itself just doesn't work. I guess it would be one thing if it was just temporary discomfort that you had to deal with, like a lot of pain you had to go through in order to actually have these things work. But unfortunately, one, tapeworms aren't controllable inside your body. They can grow up to 9 meters, or 30 feet. All in all, none of that is incredibly pleasant, and it's all stuff that you don't really have to go through because the tapeworm diet itself isn't even effective. So please, don't eat tapeworms in a desperate attempt to lose weight. There are other, better methods. So, whenever I do Dangerous Woo, I like to conclude with what the actual dangers of the particular woo are, regardless of the fact that they're just ineffective. With the tapeworm diet, I already list all the complications, the diarrhea, fever, all that other fun stuff, and the fact that the tapeworm diet is not just ineffective, but can actually cause you to lose weight due to your body craving more quickly digestible calories. Not a pleasant experience, not really good for you in any way, and please avoid this woo.
It has been a while since I've had a chance to tackle the Dangerous Woo series, but you guys voted on today's episode, so today we're going to be tackling conversion therapy.
Beaten with a Bible and told that I needed to repent the demon of homosexuality and expel him from my body.
I was a pastor in a megachurch, and I was party to destroying these people.
Do you have any idea of how many young people you had recommended go through conversion therapy?
God, I've tried to forget. I've tried to forget. In the last 4 years, I've done at least 3 or 4 funerals of people who took their life because of this issue.
In my case, I'll be blunt, he had me bottle my feces, and he told me I needed to do this to be reminded how gay men had sex. And this would correct my sexuality, which of course only increased self-hatred and the shame. Not coincidentally, around this time during the therapy, privately, I started cutting.
But the most unbearable part, Cooper says, was a backpack filled with rocks that she was forced to wear all day, every day. Do you have any idea how much weight you were carrying?
I think about 40 pounds.
And the point of the backpack was to represent
the physical burden and pain of being gay.
Hand her hands on hips, go!
There are classes, as depicted in the current movie Boy Erased, on how to act less gay.
Is this a manly shape I'm making, or is it a girly or feminine shape?
I met a producer a couple years ago who wanted to create a TV show about conversion therapy and thought I'd have some funny stories. I ended up telling him about my experience, and it's like this morbid. And he was like, well, let's check some of your friends, because they've got to have some good ones too. So it was like the first time I had caught up with some of these people in a few years, and like almost all of them were like doing pretty badly still. And I really think like this whole, I don't know if it's conversion therapy itself that is so damaging, or if it's the circumstances that leads people into conversion therapy that are damaging, but I know that like the people that have been through this are just like struggling so hard now, like whether they admit it or not. Like we weren't raised to love ourselves or to be allowed to exist. Like we're going to hell because of just our presence on this earth.
I didn't think I'd be doing a topic like this, at least not yet, but, well, since people like Milo Indianapolis actively create a world where bad ideas that are dead come back from the grave, well, I figure I might as well go ahead and cover it anyway. So,
Conversion therapy is a pseudoscientific practice of trying to change an individual's sexual orientation from homosexual or bisexual to heterosexual using psychological, physical, or even spiritual intervention. Let's go over some history before we get into the methods utilized. There's 3 periods of conversion therapy to cover. The Freudian period, and then the period of mainstream acceptance, and then a period after the Stonewall riots, where gay rights activism becomes more mainstream. Beginning with Sigmund Freud, he argued that homosexuality could be removed through the use of hypnosis. Now, he was influenced originally by a guy named Eugen Steinack, who was an endocrinologist, and what he used to try to do would be to transplant testicles from straight men into gay men in order to change their orientation. He kind of thought that they were the center of all attraction, so his methods would be utilized and then ultimately fail because the immune system would reject the transplanted glands, and while that sucked for him, that kind of works out for people going forward. Freud wrote a paper called Psychogenesis of a Case of Homosexuality in a Woman, and it described his analysis of a young woman whose parents were concerned that she was a lesbian. Her father wanted the condition changed, and Freud had to note to the father that homosexuality wasn't an illness, nor was it a neurotic conflict. So, I mean, there really wasn't any changing possible, and even if it was, it would be incredibly difficult and would only work under really favorable conditions. See also random as fuck. Freud also noted that success in conversion therapy would be defined by making heterosexual feelings possible, not necessarily by eliminating the homosexual feelings. At best, he thought he might be able to successfully make someone bi, not necessarily completely get rid of their attraction. And Freud, to his credit, wrote that most reasons people wanted to become heterosexual were superficial, such as fear of social disapproval and things like that. You know, basically you didn't want society knowing you were the gay. These weak motivating factors would never cause someone to truly change. They could only really change for themselves, and that was even if change was possible. Ultimately, if they were changing for society, they would only be taking on a mask that made it look like they were changed. When asked to treat a woman's son for homosexuality, the dreaded disease she thought it was, he wrote this letter to her. And keep this letter in mind, it's gonna come up a lot during this video.
I gather from your letter that your son is a homosexual. It is nothing to be ashamed of, no vice, no degradation. It cannot even be classified as an illness. We consider it to be a variation of the sexual function, produced by a certain arrest of sexual development. By asking me if I can help your son, you mean, I suppose, if I can abolish homosexuality and make normal heterosexuality take its place. The answer is, in a general way, we cannot promise to achieve it. In a certain number of cases, we succeeded in developing the blighted germs of heterosexual tendencies, which are present in every homosexual in majority of cases. It is no more possible. It is a question of the quality and age of the individual. The result of treatment cannot be predicted.
Basically, Sigmund Freud was trying to say that even if he was able to get anything done, the most he'd be able to do was maybe possibly get a little bit of movement towards the heterosexual zone, but even then it wasn't really guaranteed. So she left him a 1-star review on Yelp. Succeeding Sigmund Freud was his daughter, Anna Freud, and she claimed that she could much more successfully cure homosexuals from their illness. In 1949, she published some clinical remarks concerning the treatment of cases of male homosexuality, and stated that patients should choose an active partner to recapture their lost masculinity. Then, by having sex with said partner, they would be able to renew their sexual potency via magic or some shit. In 1951, she published clinical observations on the treatment of male homosexuality. Here, she argued that full object love of the opposite sex cured homosexuality. I guess that bisexuals were left entirely out of that conversation. And in 1956, she argued that journalists shouldn't publish anything in regards to the previously mentioned letter from her father, Sigmund Freud, because she'd become much more adept at curing homosexuals than her dad ever did. Kind of feeling like there might be some suppressed Freudian-style issues there, but moving on. There's other players in this story in the European front, but let's go ahead and move on to the United States. That's where I live, and Freud's ideas of psychoanalysis started to receive recognition in the US in the early 20th century. During this time, the US had attempted things such as bladder washing and rectal massaging and castration and hypnosis. These things were all criticized by a guy named Abraham Brill, who wrote The Conception of Homosexuality. He was a fan of Freud's psychoanalysis work and argued that curing homosexuality basically just meant creating bisexual people who could have heterosexual relationships. Many patients that he claimed to have cured turned out to just remain being homosexuals in the end, or being bisexuals. Again, you didn't really cure the gay out of people. That didn't happen. But enter a guy called William Stekel. Now, unlike Freud, he viewed homosexuality as a disease. This is where we get some more of the mainstream ideas that pervade at the time. He believed that through psychoanalysis, a patient could be changed into developing heterosexual feelings, much like Sigmund Freud, though he was much more confident in it than Sigmund was. If he happened to want it, though, that was kind of the key. You needed someone who wanted to be made straight in order for them to become straight. He literally believed that someone could willfully believe themselves into another sexuality. Come to the 1950s, and a guy named Edmund Bergler developed his theory for treatment. His methods boiled down to basically just blaming the victim. Bergler claimed that if gay people wanted to change, they could be cured in 90% of cases. Again, the believe yourself into it method is at play here. In other words, fake it till you make it. Bergler used what was called confrontational therapy in his research. Basically, this is where gay people were punished repeatedly in order to make them aware of their inner masochist. Bergler would repeatedly break patient confidentiality by discussing his abuses with other patients who were also receiving treatment. He would bully them, call them liars, argue that by being gay they were worthless. Bergler's ideas were popularized in the United States magazines, articles, and books around the time, but all of this stuff is aimed at non-specialists. This wasn't popularized through scientific journals. When confronted with specialists, such as Alfred Kinsey, who argued that homosexuality was an acceptable way of life, Bergler would double down on his rhetoric and methods, becoming more abusive towards his patients. And remember the name Alfred Kinsey. He's going to come up again later as well. Speaking of things that come up later, that letter from Sigmund Freud from earlier, it's still pretty important. In 1951, the mother who he wrote that letter to sent it to the American Journal of Psychiatry, where it got published for the first time in mainstream for the public to see, despite protestations from Freud's conversion therapy happy daughter years later. Now, this led to the DSM-1 classifying homosexuality as a mental disorder and not a disease. This isn't great, but it is still progress, and progress is progress. Come up to 1969, and we now enter the time of the Stonewall Riots. For all of you who still think riots can't accomplish anything, history says otherwise. You see, riots have a way of calling the public's attention to things in a way that just sitting in the ivory tower in the academic world doesn't technically do. Following the Stonewall riots, conversion therapy came under increased scrutiny by the general public, with a focus coming down on the DSM's designation of homosexuality as a psychopathology. Eventually, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality as a mental disorder from the DSM, utilizing evidence from researchers such as the previously mentioned Alfred Kinsey, and then Evelyn Hooker and Robert Spicer. Critics would argue that the APA capitulating to gay rights in this way was anti-science, but after a referendum in 1974, the decision was still held up, with or without outside pressure, because science doesn't give a shit about traditionalism. This still left something called ego-dystonic homosexuality in the DSM, though. Basically, this was where someone has a sexual orientation that is opposite of one's idealized self. So imagine that in this light, homosexuals are just failed straight people. And yeah, that's still wrong, and come the DSM-3, that would be removed as well. Enter a guy named Joseph Nicolosi. He published Reparative Therapy of Male Homosexuality in 1992. And in that same year, he helped found the NARTH organization, the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality. This organization opposed the now mainstream view of homosexuality in that it was a harmless attraction, and argued that in an ideal world, they would make effective psychology therapy available to all homosexuals who seek change. This is where we see a shift from all homosexuals must convert or die to the more soft but still insidious, we're just trying to offer them an option. This is still bigotry, but it's a different, more soft style. The American Psychoanalytic Association spoke against NARTH in 2004, stating that the organization did not adhere to their policy of non-discrimination, and that their activities were demeaning to their members who were gay and lesbian. The same year, a survey of members from the American Psychological Association rated reparative therapy as certainly discredited. So, yeah, they've since had to change their name to the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity, thanks to all this discrediting. It sounds nicer, but it's still, trying to do the same shit. I know I'm dropping a lot of names here, but I'm also covering a lot of history, so enter David Satcher. In 2001, he issues a report stating that there's no scientific evidence that sexual orientation can be changed. The same year, Spicer, who I mentioned earlier, was one of the key players in removing homosexuality from the DSM then, but in 2001, he would argue that some individuals could, with great effort, change from homosexual to heterosexual through a form of reparative therapy. This was recanted in 2012 due to the fact that these claims were based on incredibly small study groups, and when laid out bare, the results of those studies couldn't be replicated. He has since called this his only real professional regret after apologizing to the LGBTQ community for making such sloppy claims in the first place. In a letter dated the 23rd of February 2011 to the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, the Attorney General of the United States stated that while sexual orientation carried no visible badge, a growing scientific consensus accepts that sexual orientation is a characteristic that is immutable. Since all this, gay rights groups have found that reparative therapy existing at all increases the chances for depression and suicide in LGBTQ people, because even the existence of conversion therapy facilities or camps increases the numbers of people who are incentivized by family, supposed friends, religious leaders, and otherwise into trying these failed techniques for self-change. Now, we've gone over a few of the techniques that were used, but let's maybe talk about them in detail to figure out why, aside from wide cred discreditation, these things aren't supposed to be used in the modern day. We have everything from electric shock therapy, fun, use of tons of drugs, forced consumption of heterosexual pornography, the fucking Bible being used to beat people, making gay men bottle their feces in order to be reminded of how gay sex happens, the previously mentioned psychoanalysis, which basically tried to make people bisexual, fucking castration of all things, forced hormone injections, and then there's reparative therapy, which we talked about earlier. Reparative therapy thought that same-sex attraction was the body's way of trying to self-repair feelings of inferiority. In 2014, the Republican Party of Texas endorsed counseling, which offers reparative therapy and treatment on their party platform. That's not that long ago, guys. This is despite it being discredited by the American Psychological Association at that time. There's also sex therapy and cuddle therapy. In cuddle therapy, you're asked to cuddle a partner of the same sex to cure your attraction to them, somehow. And then in sex therapy, someone would basically make, say, a gay man have sex with a woman, or vice versa. This is sort of a, you don't know what you're missing until you try it kind of technique. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that if this technique worked, then maybe all the heterosexual men in the world should try gay sex, because, you know, you don't know what you're missing until you try it, I guess. I guess we're just really, really unique in that we know what we like, and gay people obviously don't, apparently. Unfortunately for conversion therapy advocates, the only people who seem to be cured by something like sex therapy are people who were bisexual. And by cured, I mean in the Freudian sense, where they're still bisexual. So nothing really changes. At all. Congratulations, you succeeded at doing nothing. I hate to let you know, though, but things do get a little darker. Darker than electroshock therapy. We're talking lobotomies. There's a guy named Walter Friedman,
who popularized the ice pick lobotomy as a treatment for homosexuality. He performed it on as many as 3,400 people. If you don't know, an ice pick lobotomy is basically where somebody takes a thin instrument, puts it under your eyelid, and severs your prefrontal cortex. This destroys your initiative, empathy, ability to function on your own, and basically, you become mentally dull and autonomous, almost vegetable. Yeah, that might not make someone crave homosexual sex as often, but it also kind of destroys them as a person. Completely. I wouldn't say that's worth it. Needless to say, most of these treatments are cruel and unnecessary because homosexuality, despite good old Christian arguments of the past, isn't harmful. It's just a sexual orientation, and when it's between two consenting adults, the only damage that's really caused is to a religious person's ego. The best arguments against it that Christians can muster either rely on negative psychological effects brought on by the world that they themselves created, which includes the cruel treatments to LGBTQ people, or by threatening them with an imaginary place to burn in hell for all eternity. What I mean by those is, they think if you're gay, you're going to burn in hell, and they'll argue that suicide rates are higher if you're LGBTQ, but then by arguing that repeatedly, they enforce the negative view on LGBTQ people, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You increase the chances that people will commit suicide when you create a crueler world around them. And so it's just cruelty. Plain and simple. The methods to change it are ineffective, they're wrong, and the arguments against homosexuality are, well, ineffective and cruel. And as much as I'd like to make a bunch of jokes about a flaccid god desperately trying to fuck humanity for doing the things he designed them to do, I'll instead mention how the danger in this particular woo should be as plain as day. Unless you don't consider lobotomies, forced castration, and threats of hellfire to be, dangerous to anybody's well-being or psyche. Honestly, I wish the world would wholly abandon this practice, but there's still plenty of it being used today. The argument that conversion therapy should be an option for those who want it are predicated on creating the cruel kind of world that tells homosexual people that they're broken and need that change in the first place. If the world didn't condone this kind of cruelty to LGBTQ people to begin with, well, there wouldn't be the feeling of needing to change, and then the conversion therapy wouldn't have anything to prey upon. So, if you want to suggest someone undergo conversion therapy, maybe consider the opportunity that lays ahead of you. You see, there's a perfectly good pineapple in some grocery store somewhere near you, and, well, you should be cognizant of the good you can do for the world by simply taking that pineapple and shoving it directly up your ass. Now, if you enjoyed this video, maybe consider hitting the like button and subscribing, potentially even sharing it with your friends if you really loved it. I mean, hell, if you found this video to be really great and profound, maybe even consider checking out my Patreon, where you get access to videos like this early, and also you get some behind-the-scenes footage. As always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.